You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon to you. Lots to come on the show for you this afternoon. First and foremost, we're talking the NHS. Is a pay deal actually close? For England, so it would seem. Scotland, GMB Union in Scotland, has agreed a deal with the Scottish government at 6.5% over the next year. It looks like it's a slightly smaller deal if it's accepted in England, but we're going to get all the details for you this afternoon, fingers crossed. Doesn't mean all strike action is over, of course, because when it comes to the rails, well, there you go. If you're a rail traveller, you'll know there's plenty of strike action going on today and no resolution to that in sight, so it would seem. Also, we're going to be looking at budget reaction for you. The big budget yesterday, but now, of course, the Labour Party is taking it apart piece by piece. They're not very happy about it. Is it just a budget for the rich, as the Labour Party's saying? We'll examine all of that for you. Mind you, if you are in the government, you've got something else to worry about, and that's your TikTok account. Do you use it? Are you worried about the Chinese government being able to hack all your information? Well, the government isn't necessarily worried about us, but they are worried about their own official mobile devices. So they've banned government phones having TikTok on them. Serious issue or something we're just overplaying? Let us know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.uk. All that still to come. First, though, here's all your headlines with Bethany.
Stephen, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says the impact of the government's new childcare subsidy on the labour market is highly uncertain. It's after the Chancellor announced children over 9 months would be entitled to 30 hours of free childcare a week. The independent group also said scrapping the pension's lifetime allowance was unlikely to play a big part in increasing the workforce, but warned it would be expensive. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has pledged to reverse the pension plans, saying it will only help the richest 1%.
The idea that a £1 billion giveaway to the richest 1% was necessary just falls apart the moment it's examined. But it is about priorities. You know, the government has chosen not to prioritise those families that are really struggling. Energy bills, yes, of course, there's some cap on it, but they're still double what they were just a few months ago. And, you know, a lot of people are paying £2,000 more on their mortgage because of the mess that the government have made.
In some breaking news, NHS staff and ambulance workers in Scotland, represented by the GMB union, have accepted a pay offer from the Scottish Government. The offer, made to 160,000 staff, equates to an average of 6.5% increase. The Royal College of Midwives and the Royal College of Nursing are still balloting their members, but have recommended they accept the deal. The announcement comes amid reports that health unions in England are close to resolving their ongoing pay dispute, with a deal possible as early as today. Commuters are facing major disruption on the rail network as members of the RMT union walk out again in a long-running dispute over pay. 3 in 5 services across the UK are cancelled, and further strike action is planned for the 30th of March and the 1st of April. RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch says the pay offer of a 5% rise for last year and a further 4% rise this year equates to a real terms pay cut.
All of those pay increases, such as they are, which are amount to pay cuts, have got to be funded by changes to our members' working conditions. So it's a self-funded pay rise, really, and that's very difficult for us because the conditions they're putting on that deal are just not acceptable to our people. So we're stuck in a deadlock, really, where the offer is underfunded, the conditions are not acceptable, and we haven't got a way forward.
As you've been hearing, the government has imposed a ban on the video app TikTok on all government devices with immediate effect. Cabinet Minister Oliver Dowden told the Commons it's a precautionary measure following the National Cyber Security Centre's review of the Chinese-owned app. The United States, Canada and Belgium have already introduced similar measures. MPs are to vote on Rishi Sunak's post-Brexit trade deal for Northern Ireland next week. They'll be asked to approve a statutory instrument relating to the Stormont Break section of the Windsor Framework on Wednesday. It'll be the first time the Commons has been able to vote on the Prime Minister's new deal, which was agreed with the EU last month. The London Stock Exchange has rebounded after suffering its worst losses since the start of the COVID pandemic. Yesterday, the FTSE 100 closed down more than 292 points as worldwide banking stocks went into freefall. Credit Suisse will borrow up to £45 billion from Switzerland's central bank in an emergency loan. It's after shares in the firm dropped by more than a quarter, leading to uncertainty within the markets. 2 more men have been charged after a drive-by shooting outside a church in London in January. 22-year-old Tyrell Lacroix and 23-year-old Jordan Walters have been charged with 6 counts of wounding with intent. Yesterday, 19-year-old Alrico Nelson Martin was charged with possession of a shotgun with intent to endanger life, as well as 6 other charges. 4 women and 2 girls were injured in the incident, with one of them still undergoing treatment in hospital. A 400-year-old hotel which was housing Ukrainian refugees in West Sussex has been engulfed by a major fire. The blaze broke out after midnight at a neighbouring property before spreading to the roof of the Angel Inn. West Sussex Fire and Rescue Services described the incident as significant, with 14 fire engines attending the scene. Over 30 people were evacuated. No casualties were reported. And the Pentagon has released video of the moment a Russian fighter jet almost collided with a US drone over the Black Sea earlier this week. The declassified video shows the Russian plane approaching the unmanned drone and dumping fuel nearby, which damaged a propeller. Russia has denied accusations that its jet acted recklessly in the incident, which happened on Tuesday. You're up to date on GB News. Now, though, it's back to Stephen.
Bethany, thank you. Now, let's start with what could be a major breakthrough in the dispute between the government and the NHS. Nurses and ambulance workers in England have staged a number of strikes, as you'll know, over recent months, but there's now some hope that both sides are close to agreeing a new pay deal that could bring that strike action to an end. It comes after a winter of industrial action, which has seen nurses, ambulance staff and physios all go on strike. So we're expecting some sort of announcement on that this afternoon, fingers crossed. In the last half hour, NHS staff represented by GMB Scotland have accepted a pay offer from the Scottish Government. As you heard from Bethany, the offer made to about 160,000 NHS staff, including nurses, midwives and paramedics, works out at an average of about 6.5% increase for the coming year. So it could be a significant move forward. It is for Scotland. Are we going to get the same results for England? Let's talk to our political reporter, Olivia Utley, who's outside the headquarters of Unison, which represents many of those NHS workers. What's the latest we have, Olivia?
Hello, Stephen. Yes, so we are expecting some sort of announcement in the next half hour or so. As far as we understand it this afternoon, what we can expect to see is an offer from the government of a 5% pay rise for the 2023-24 year and subsequent years, and this is the most interesting bit, a 6% pay rise for the 22-23 year, backdated. Now, previously, the government has maintained that it has been unable to reopen negotiations about pay for this year, and that's where the sticking point really was. But at this 11th hour, it seems that the government has shifted its position and decided to offer that pay to the nurses, ambulance workers and other hospital staff who are part of this group of unions who are all engaging in negotiations together. Now, this doesn't include doctors. It's important to say that first off. The doctors are still on the third day of their strikes, and we're not expecting to see a resolution to that anytime soon. And the other caveat is that there are 14 unions involved in this dispute, and although they are all at the moment negotiating together as a sort of pack, as it were, it is possible that one or more of those unions decide not to recommend the government's offer to its members. And of course, members still have to vote on whether or not to accept the deal that the government has put to them. But it does look like we are getting pretty close to a breakthrough. It looks likely that those unions will recommend that their members accept that 5% deal, 6% for this year. And so we could see an end to the strikes in sight.
It's interesting, though, Olivia, isn't it, that this is, as you say, a significant change in position for the government, almost hidden under the radar, because we tend to look to the years to come and not the year that we've just had. What could have triggered that? Why would the government suddenly change their position on the 2022-23 financial year?
Well, it seems that what they've managed to do is essentially they've found themselves a ladder to climb down, because what they were arguing is that increasing wages for this year would cause an inflationary pay spiral. Now what they're saying is that actually inflation is due to halve over the next year anyway. So a 5% pay rise, 6%, something around that figure, which is what they're offering, shouldn't be so inflationary. Essentially, the government has found some more headroom because inflation is going down. And they found this clever way of offering a deal for this year, a consolidated deal, they call it, for the 2022-23 year. They're calling it a one-off COVID payment of 6%, a pay award, which is considered a one-off, so it won't count towards their inflationary pay spiral. But essentially, yes, the government has found itself a ladder to climb down and is using it because they are desperate to see the back of these strikes, which have been crippling the country for 4 months now.
It's going to be interesting to see what the members make of this. I mean, certainly GMB Scotland accepting that pay offer from the Scottish Government of 6.5%. I mean, what was the approval vote there? Something like 59.7%. I mean, it's hardly overwhelming.
It's not overwhelming, but what we have seen every time a new deal is put to members, the number of members actually voting to accept that deal, although it hasn't reached the 50% threshold yet, is getting higher. So what the unions may have calculated is that some of their workers are actually sick of going on strike. They've lost out on a lot of pay over the last few months. So it may be that those members are pretty keen to accept a deal if the unions tell them that that deal is acceptable. And of course, it is a huge, huge position shift from the government. So it could well be that unions and their members see this as a big win and are totally prepared to take it. But we mustn't jump the gun.
No, we mustn't. Olivia, thank you very much indeed. If you are watching and you work for the NHS in Scotland, love to hear from you. Did you vote to accept that deal? 6.5% from the Scottish Government. If you work for the NHS in England, what do you make of all of this? A sort of one-off payment, if you like, which is basically 6% for the last year, and then 5% moving forward. Is that enough? Would you vote for that? Have you had enough of striking? Enough of voting, maybe, as well. But do let us know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'd love to have your thoughts on that. Well, it does mean, then, that it looks like the end could be in sight for strike action from some NHS staff, at least. It is a very different story on the railways and in schools. Train services across the country very badly hit today. Members of the RMT are striking. Schools and universities also affected, with teachers and lecturers taking industrial action today. Let's head over to Jack Carson, who's outside Birmingham New Street Station. I mean, yet another day of chaos, Jack, for regular train travellers. I mean, what's been the attitude of people there? They're just sort of getting on with it now.
Well, I think, you know, it's coming up. We've had so many months of train strikes. A lot of people here that I've been speaking to have just got alternative arrangements for travel. They know how to get to work when it is a strike day, and so many of them using the bus networks, the tram networks, the other public transport networks around this city. It could have been a lot worse today in Birmingham, particularly because the National Express, who run the bus companies here, were planning on a complete and total walkout of all the bus routes today, but after a revised pay offer was put on the table earlier this week, those buses are running, so people have been able to find alternative arrangements. But 50% of the rail network is down today. Only 50% of trains running. For local services here, it's around 1 per hour, and the main coastlines also running as well. It's certainly not as much disruption as we've had in the past few months with no trains at all, but we are getting still some disruption. I've been speaking to people here on the ground, and this is what they've had to say on their thoughts about the strikes.
It's affecting hard-working people. People want money. People want money to live in times that are hard. Cost of living, petrol, food, energy. They deserve money like everybody else wants a decent wage to survive.
They're very inconvenient for me who's got the train today, but I absolutely understand why people are fighting for what they believe in.
It's just an inconvenience to the whole public, isn't it? But I don't think the trains have been any good ever since they were privatised, so I don't think I've seen anything improved by privatising it whatsoever. We're paying through the nose for that service, and it's next to useless.
It's interesting, Jack, isn't it? Whatever side of the fence people sit on in regard to the strikes, they're getting pretty disillusioned with the whole rail service, which is not good news moving forward.
No, because realistically, once these strikes are over, there's got to be a level of trust between the public and, of course, the train operating companies, that the train operating company can still earn money in order to improve the railway services and, of course, pay those workers that extra money. We know between the rail delivery group, the RMT, when it comes to Network Rail, that a deal looks close. They've put that 9% offer to their members. That ballot ends on Monday. But there are questions over the other offer between the train operating companies and the RMT, after they offered the same 13% to some of the lower paid people within those train operating companies, 9% for most of them. Rail delivery group saying, why isn't that a deal also put to the members as well? But Mick Lynch saying that offer was rubbish, and that when you look at the fact that over the last 3 years there's been no pay increases, the retail price index of inflation is actually 22% over the 3 years, and so 9%, 13% is still a real-time pay cut. So Network Rail, we might have a deal coming through and that industrial action suspended, but in terms of the dispute between the train operating companies, it still looks like there's a long way to go.
OK, Jack, thanks very much indeed. Love to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, we've been asking for months now if you have any sympathy. And, you know, it has to be said, at the beginning of this, you know, the support for the strikers and even the rail strikers was high. It was certainly the majority. I wonder if that has changed over the last few months. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Real-term pay cuts, says Mick Lynch, even the best offers that are on the table. Do we all just have to deal with that? Is anyone getting an inflation-busting pay rise? Well, one or two of the strikers are, it would seem, but not many. So I wonder if we just need to get on with it. Easy for us to say if we're not on strike. Let us know what you think. Now, of course, all this ties in with the budget, of course, and the dust is settling on the budget yesterday. The Shadow Chancellor has been unpicking it in the House of Commons this afternoon. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has defended his pensions giveaway as he aims to incentivise people to turn away from early retirement. The Shadow Chancellor accused the government of widening the cost of living chasm and delivering for the wrong people.
Families are facing the biggest hit to living standards since records began. The only surprise in the budget was a huge handout to the richest 1% of pension savers. Yet again, working people and businesses, the key to our economic success, have been put at the bottom of the pile. The question people will be asking themselves after 13 years of Conservative government are these. Are me and my family better off? Are our schools, our hospitals, our transport system working better than when the Conservatives came to office 13 years ago? Frankly, is anything in Britain working better today than it did when the Conservatives came to office? And the answer to those questions is a resounding no.
So Rachel Reeves there criticising Jeremy Hunt for putting, as she put it, working people at the bottom of the pile. But how do businesses, particularly small businesses, feel about all of this? Let's talk to Katie Hopkins, not that one, another one, who's the owner of the Chair Hairdressers. Katie, it's really good to see you this afternoon. What do you make of all of this? As a small business owner, what impact is this budget going to have on you?
So specifically for me, it's looking at childcare, the childcare kind of policy that they put forward. And the point of it is that it should be able to enable my experienced staff to be able to come back to work. But the reality is that they can't because there isn't the places available. I have a member of staff who can actually come back to work. Her son is eligible for 30 hours and she is actually unable to because there is a shortage of places for her to be able to place her son. And I find it, I mean, our industry is finding it incredibly difficult at the moment, not to mention other industries.
I mean, it's a tricky one, that, though, isn't it? Because, I mean, if the incentives are there, the money's there from the Chancellor to sort of allow this to work, but say if you haven't got the places, that's another issue. But also it's an issue that can't be solved overnight.
No, it isn't. And the thing is, he's actually put something in place that is going to be coming to fruition in April next year. We need it now. We need the actual places available now for my experienced team to actually come back. We're in desperate need in our industry to have experienced staff. I'm very lucky here. We train from within, so we have a fabulous training programme and I invest in new talent. But obviously we have a certain clientele that likes to have that experience within the salon, and those members of staff are unable to come back because of obviously not having enough availability for childcare in this specific area.
How much do those staff want to come back? Because although, you know, they'll get you know, some eligible free childcare, it is also ultimately going to cost them a lot of money at some point. You know, do they say, well, you know, it's hardly worth the money to come back?
Yeah, no, and that's why we offer a really competitive commission system. I've obviously just given all of my team a pay rise. I mean, ask any mum at home with some children, young children, definitely coming to work and having a nice coffee and enjoying their work. I mean, it's making sure that you actually offer a really great work environment, which I think we do here, and a really good clientele. We have a fabulous, grade 2 listed building here with 36 positions. We have beauty areas. We have 25 staff, and it's a great working environment, if I do say so myself. But it is, and it needs to work for everyone. But then we need to have the facilitation. We need to have the places available for the children to actually go to.
I mean, what on the positive side of this, it seems that your business is thriving, and so you may be able to sort of manage your way through this. But you must, I mean, within your local community, you must also deal with other businesses who aren't doing as well, and who one would presume this could be the difference between make or break.
I mean, it's an incredibly challenging environment at the moment, especially on the high street. In my area in Canterbury, the council, very lovely, have put up our car parking prices. So again, for people to be able to come into town, it's been, making it incredibly difficult. But yeah, again, other colleagues, business owners in Canterbury, it's incredibly challenging, and any help would be, fabulous to actually have experienced staff coming back to work.
Katie, really good to talk to you this afternoon. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Your thoughts on that, if you would, this afternoon. Did the Chancellor really do enough? Has he just sort of lined the pockets of people who've got plenty of money anyway on the sort of proviso of, well, work a bit longer and you can save more into your pension? Is there enough for childcare? Is there enough to get those mums back into the workplace and back into businesses like Katie's? Let us know what you think. Meanwhile, whilst we're staying on the cheery news, are we on the verge of another global banking crisis? We'll tell you more in a minute.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 3:27. Now, stock markets have rebounded in banking stocks after Credit Suisse said it would borrow up to £45 billion from the Swiss Central Bank. Now, that all comes following a collapse in its share price, which sent stock markets tumbling yesterday, less than a week after the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, prompting fears of another global banking crisis. But here's the good news. The FTSE 100 has since gained 1.4% after the agreement restored confidence in the banking sector. Credit Suisse had sought help after revealing it had found material weakness in its financial reporting. Quite what that means, I don't know. That's why we talk to people like Julian Jessup, an independent economist. Good to see you, Julian, this afternoon. Look, I mean, they've taken action. People are getting confidence back. But should we now be concerned about the banking sector in 2023?
Well, I think we should. It is quite tempting to dismiss the events of the last few weeks as a series of sort of isolated incidents. So, for example, Silicon Valley Bank in the US was a sort of niche bank catering to a particular market that made some pretty risky and ultimately unsuccessful bets on the government bond market. Credit Suisse has been in trouble for many years. It's basically a very badly run bank that can now probably survive with better management and a big injection of cash. So if you take these sort of cases one by one, I think, OK, we probably would avoid a global financial crisis. But I would still be worried for two reasons. First of all, it hasn't actually taken a lot to trigger these crises. I mean, all that's happened is that interest rates have returned to something more like normal levels after a long period where they've been extremely low. But in the UK, for example, interest rates still only 4%. That's not normally a very, very painful level. And the second problem is that the difficulties here might go well beyond the financial sector. There's plenty of parts of what you might call the real economy, like the housing market and like small businesses that haven't yet adjusted to higher interest rates either.
All right, so with that in mind, what do we need to brace for? I mean, what do banks need to do? As you say, there doesn't seem to be these huge things that are triggering this. So what then can banks do to improve their resilience?
Well, I think that the bigger banks will probably be fine. I mean, they tend to be fairly well regulated. They have lots of capital, they have lots of liquidity. And actually, many of them have benefited in the last few days because what people have done is they've taken their money out of smaller banks that might be riskier and put them into the bigger banks. So there's been a bank run on smaller banks, but the opposite for bigger ones. So I think bigger banks don't necessarily need to do more. But the problem is that their behaviour in sort of being more cautious in future might make it harder for households and businesses to borrow money. So not only are interest rates going to be higher, so money is more expensive, but also it's going to be harder to access credit because banks are going to be a lot more cautious.
I mean, from a public perspective, from those of us who aren't economists and don't necessarily understand all of this, are there any comparisons with what we saw in 2008 to perhaps what we're seeing a little bit of now?
Yes, I think there's a negative comparison, which is that these crises often start small in unexpected areas and then blow it up into something much, much bigger. So the crisis in 2008 was triggered by problems in the US subprime mortgage market, which then rippled out across the entire world. The more recent crisis, and you could look, for example, at problems in the tech sector in the US or the bad management of the major Swiss banks. So sort of small problems turning out to be large. I think the more positive point is that we do seem to have learned a lot of lessons from 2008 in the sense that the regulators are a bit more on the ball, making sure that banks are well capitalised, that they have plenty of liquidity. So, as I said, I think that the big banks, just certainly the big British banks, will get through this okay. But the underlying problem here is that interest rates are returning towards more normal levels. We have got addicted over the last few years to very low interest rates and lots of cheap money. We have to wean ourselves off that. So it's going to be a painful period, if you like, cold turkey, mixing my metaphors with chickens coming home to roost.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning that, this isn't just about the banking sector, it's things like the housing sector as well. And now, and that is the problem, isn't it? These interest rates within the housing sector, traditionally, they're at normal levels, but it's pretty hard for us to swallow as consumers, isn't it?
Well, that's the problem. I mean, people have been paying relatively low mortgage rates for many, many years, been able to get fixes of 3 or 2% or even less. Now rates are back to more normal levels of say 4 to 5%, but that's still a big increase in the monthly payments that people need to make. On top of that, you've got the risk of a crash in house prices. House prices are at very high levels relative to incomes. Now that's okay when the interest rates on the mortgages are low, but that's no longer the case. So I think there's a significant risk of a housing market crash. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing for the economy as a whole, particularly if some people are finally able to afford a house, and new buyers at least might find that their mortgage costs are actually lower because they're having to put less money up front to buy the house in the first place. But it will add to economic uncertainty. It could be bad for the construction industry, and it is something I think that could damage consumer confidence more generally.
Yeah, no, it could. Julian, really good to see you this afternoon. Thanks very much indeed. It sort of sounds worrying, doesn't it? Even if it's not necessarily going to be a bad thing. It's certainly the housing market. You won't want to go back into negative equity. That was the thing back in the late 90s or early 90s. Actually, there was a lot of negative equity about, wasn't there? And that's something we don't want to fall into. But anyway, don't be too pessimistic. Julian seems to be sort of looking on the optimistic side of things a little bit, which is positive. There's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. A cybersecurity expert is going to give his view on whether or not TikTok should have been banned from government phones. And we're going to be live outside the 400-year-old hotel housing Ukrainian refugees that has been badly damaged by fire. First, though, let's get the latest news headlines with Bethany.
Stephen, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 3:34. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says the impact of the government's new childcare subsidy on the labour market is highly uncertain. It's after the Chancellor announced children over 9 months would be entitled to 30 hours of free care a week. The independent group also said scrapping the pension's lifetime allowance was unlikely to play a big part in increasing the workforce, but warned it would be expensive. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has pledged to reverse the pension plans, saying it will only help the richest 1%.
The idea that a £1 billion giveaway to the richest 1% was necessary just falls apart the moment it's examined. But it is about priorities. The government has chosen not to prioritise those families that are really struggling. Energy bills, yes, of course, there's some cap on it, but they're still double what they were just a few months ago. A lot of people are paying £2,000 more on their mortgage because of the mess that the government have made.
NHS staff and ambulance workers in Scotland, represented by the GMB union, have accepted a pay offer from the Scottish Government. Made to 160,000 staff, it equates to an average 6.5% increase. The Royal College of Midwives and the Royal College of Nursing are still balloting their members, but have recommended they accept the deal. It's amid reports that health unions in England are close to resolving their ongoing pay dispute. Commuters are facing another round of rail strikes today as members of the RMT union walk out in a long-running dispute over pay. Passengers are being warned to expect disruption as 3 in 5 services across the UK are cancelled. Further strike action is planned for the 30th of March and the 1st of April. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB, digital radio and TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Stephen.
Now, you will have heard about the awful situation with a hotel housing Ukrainian refugees. It was a 400-year-old hotel, easy for me to say, engulfed by fire in West Sussex in the early hours of this morning. Now, it's thought the fire broke out just after 1 o'clock this morning at the property on North Street in Midhurst before spreading to the roof of the Angel Inn next door. It's obviously a devastating situation. Those people have been taken away, obviously in the middle of the night, taken out. Now, there were some reports of a couple of people being injured, not bad enough, thankfully, to require any hospitalisation. So, do you know what? It's been a lucky escape, hasn't it? And it's all about now, of course, trying to find out what has caused this, but also what happens to those refugees who've had to now leave that hotel. Let's talk to our national reporter, Theo Chikomba, who's there. What do we know at this stage, Theo?
Good afternoon. Well, what we know at the moment is that those people who were in this hotel have been looked after by the local council and other volunteers who've been helping them throughout the day. We understand there was a fire here at the hotel around 1 o'clock in the morning. Emergency services were called to the scene and they've been here ever since. And at the moment, you may be able to see just over my left shoulder, there's a cloud of smoke. This is the middle of the high street here in Midhurst, where cars normally go through here to go to places like Chichester and London. It's been completely closed off for the entire day, and we're being told by those who are working here on the scene, particularly from the fire and rescue service, that they'll be here for the next few days potentially as investigations continue, and as well as they try to put the fire down. I understand that it's still going on. We're still seeing smoke, and it has been like this for pretty much most of the day. But those who were inside are safe. And earlier this afternoon, I spoke to Ruben, who was here at 1 o'clock in the morning, just after his shift, and he saw the fire and helped those people who were inside as well.
Now, thanks very much indeed. Now, the World Health Organization has... Do you know, it's all a bit grim this afternoon, isn't it? I hate to say it. If you've got anything positive to talk about, do get in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Anyway, the World Health Organization has issued a pretty stark warning that the world is facing an increase in deadly infections. So how worried should we be? We'll tell you more in a few minutes, but this is GB News. I'll tell you what I want to do first, though, actually. Before we head to a break, I want to bring you the latest from yesterday's budget, because, of course, it's all being discussed in Parliament right now. Let's head to Westminster and get some insight from our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. Hi, Tom. I mean, certainly Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, seems determined to say that this, in effect, has been a budget for the rich.
Yes, the Labour Party have got a clear line they want to take away from this budget, and that is that the budget represents a tax cut predominantly for the 1%. Why do they say that? Well, it's all about this pension contribution cap that, of course, has been scrapped. Originally, you could contribute £1 million towards your pension before punitive extra taxes were being added. Now, the government has scrapped that old system, meaning there is no limit on the amount you can put into your pension before those punitive taxes bite in. And the idea with that is, of course, getting people back into the workforce, stopping so many people retiring early, particularly people within the NHS, really GPs, doctors, surgeons and the like, who are retiring early en masse at the moment, because it's actually punitive for them within the tax system to carry on working. The government wanted to sort of sort out that system, but they've done it in a way that goes much beyond the NHS, goes to, of course, anyone working in any sector. The Labour Party say that that, in effect, is a tax cut for the 1%. However, it must be said that Labour's own Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, has been on record in the past of promoting a similar change. So perhaps it could be said that the Labour Party has had multiple positions on this too.
Tom, stay there, because I just want to bring you some breaking news and a statement from the government and the NHS Staff Council that we've just received. A government spokesperson has said the government and the NHS Staff Council, which brings together NHS employers and unions representing the Agenda for Change workforce, have completed negotiations and have reached a final offer. It includes additional pay for 2022-23 and a pay settlement for 23-24. Both sides believe it represents a fair and reasonable settlement that acknowledges the dedication of staff while acknowledging the wider economic pressures currently facing the UK. And crucially, those unions with mandates for industrial action, the Royal College of Nursing, Unison, the GMB, the CSP, Unite and the BDA, will now consult their members to see whether strike action will continue. It will be paused while these ballots are ongoing. Tom, this is significant, isn't it?
This is significant. This is a deal reached, of course, between the government and the representative groups for those unions. Those unions will recommend to their members that this deal be passed, and of course that makes it overwhelmingly likely that it will be. Of course, we don't know the full details of this deal. We just know that it means more money. How much more money is a question. Of course, the unions had been asking for a significant amount more money, and crucially it looks like the government has moved on the pay offer for 2022-23. That's backdated pay that is part of this deal. Now, late last night we were getting hints that this was on the brink of being agreed. It did seem that today this moment would come, and yes, in the last few minutes the government has announced that we are here, that this deal has been reached, and frankly this could be putting an end to the huge amount of industrial action that we have seen right across the NHS in recent weeks and indeed months. This is a very significant moment. Of course, not over the line yet. These unions' memberships have to back whatever has been agreed, and there will be time in the coming days and weeks, no doubt, where we find out the actual detail of this deal, how much extra money has been given for last financial year and for this coming financial year too. How much is that going to cost taxpayers? The government has, of course, been saying throughout this process that they don't want to do anything that may well stoke inflation. They don't want to instigate what's called a wage price spiral. Does the government truly believe what it's agreed now will avoid that? And are the unions happy with the level that has been agreed? There is much to learn in the coming days and weeks, and no doubt people across Parliament scrutinising, but of course across the unions as well, will be scrutinising the precise terms and conditions that have been settled here.
Yeah, well, as you say, we wait for more details. Tom, for now, thanks very much indeed. So what it means is the strike action is off for now, whilst this goes out to the ballot of the membership. If you are part of that, if you're one of those NHS workers who's been on strike, and it pretty much includes everyone apart from doctors, which are in a different category, however, what would you accept? Are you going to be taking the recommendation that this is the best deal you're going to get? Now, as Tom said, we don't know the precise detail, but we think it's something like 6% for the last financial year up until April, up until next month, and then 5% moving on from that. Are you going to vote yes for that? Are you going to accept that? It's a lot less than what the nurses are asking for, but is it a good compromise deal? Let us know if you're affected by that, how you would vote, how you will vote when that ballot reaches you. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, as I was saying before, in grim news, the World Health Organization has a stark warning that the world is facing an increase in deadly infections. We'll tell you more about it shortly. This is GB.
Hello, it's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Tune in tonight at 8 o'clock for State of the Nation. I'll be here live in the studio and notably not working from home with my distinguished panel, including the free speech warrior, Toby Young. And don't forget, we'll be hearing from you. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God, particularly the voice of the British people. Don't forget to email me, mailmog@gbnews.uk. All that and much more coming up at 8 o'clock on State of the Nation.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it. it like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Well, at 3:48, let's just update you on the breaking news this afternoon then. Just in the last few moments, the government and the NHS Staff Council, now they represent nurses, ambulance staff and other NHS workers, have finished negotiations and have reached an agreement, so it would seem. So further strikes by ambulance staff and other NHS workers are suspended. Unions will now recommend acceptance of the new pay offer to NHS workers. Now, we don't know exactly what that pay offer is going to be, but we think it's going to be in the region of about 5% moving forward, and actually backdated for the last year, 6%. Now, that would, quite how that works, how it's given out, does it classed as a bonus, or however you look at it, the various reasons for doing all of that in the way that they are. But is that going to be enough? The members going to accept that? You would think, if it's recommended by the unions, then they probably would. But if you're affected by that, I'd love to hear your thoughts. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Now, staying with health news, actually, a new analysis of antibiotics being developed suggests there aren't enough in the pipeline, particularly those needed to target dangerous pathogens. The review from the World Health Organization shows just 12 new antibiotics have entered the market in 5 years, from 2017 to 2021. The WHO says time is running out, and without immediate action, we risk returning to a pre-antibiotic era where common infections become deadly. Let's talk to the Chief Executive Officer at the Association of Independent Multiple Pharmacies, Dr. Layla Hambeck. Layla, really good to see you this afternoon. Why have we reached this point where we're so concerned about how effective antibiotics that we currently have in the system really are going to be?
Well, unfortunately, we know that bacteria have become resistant to many of the common antibiotics that we currently have. And there is a need for new types of antibiotics to come to the market. And that is not happening in terms of the pace of it is not as quickly as it should be. So the antibiotic resistance is a big issue at the moment facing the healthcare system.
So why are we not seeing more in the pipeline then? I mean, presumably they're just not that easy to dream up, are they?
Well, it's not an easy process, as you say, but it's also, it requires budgets and also the pharmaceutical companies that are working on antibiotics. Many of them are not working on the new types of antibiotics. And that could be said in terms of it's something that is not very easy, but also governments need to put more budget into research and making sure that we come up with new medicines against bacteria, because the current ones, unfortunately, many of them people have developed resistance to.
Is there nothing sort of at the end of the tunnel, light at the end of the tunnel, if you like, when it comes to the COVID vaccines? Because the way they were developed, I think, is there nothing off the back of the COVID vaccines that could actually prove to be an interesting doorway into developing new antibiotics?
Well, this is something that obviously requires a lot of research, and research requires funding, and funding is required to come from governments to make sure that this is processed and move forward. One thing that we can do all as people and citizens is to ensure that we don't use antibiotics in cases where antibiotics are not necessary. For example, for cold and flu, not using antibiotics for conditions that actually antibiotics don't work against will help the situation. But as I said, there's budget required, and also new ways of research are required to get new products onto the market.
Why does it require government spending on this? I mean, we're talking about huge companies, the pharmaceuticals, and we know they spend hundreds of billions of pounds on research and development. So, I mean, it's a huge investment for them. The other side is, of course, if they produce something that works, well, then they can sell it to the world. There's a global market there. But doesn't that mean that the funding for R&D should come from them and not from us?
But it's a very complicated process in terms of coming with new medicines, and this is a public health issue affecting many countries in terms of the bacterial resistance. And so therefore there needs to be some support in terms of supporting companies with their research, so that at the end of it there is something that we can all benefit from. I get what you're saying in terms of the pharmaceutical companies having budgets and so on, but this is a public health issue, and we need to make sure that the research that's required around this is funded to get it going, so that they can invest in it.
OK, Dr. Hambet, really good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Now, the Chinese-owned social media app TikTok has been banned on all UK government phones after security concerns were raised over its data-gathering technology. Oliver Dowden announced in the House of Commons the app would be banned on all devices issued to government ministers and civil servants following a review by the National Cyber Security Centre. Does this make sense or not? Let's talk to Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer and cybersecurity expert. Philip, really good to see you. Is this a sensible move, or have we sort of let put the cart before the horse? Or, I mean, how does this actually work?
It's a hugely sensible move. In fact, it should have happened a long time ago. The access that TikTok has potentially got onto everything that is on your device is phenomenal. It can track your movements, it can access your camera, it can access your microphone, it can access your contacts, just about everything that is on that device you've given TikTok permission to do. It may be a popular video app, but it's what's going on in the background. And the parent company behind it, ByteDance, is partially owned by the Chinese state. It has got boards on it that sit there that are Chinese state boards, and Article 7 of China's national intelligence law requires Chinese-based companies to comply with any requests that come in from their national intelligence agencies. So it is one of the biggest intelligence gathering tools that exists.
But of course, they say, the company itself says information is not passed to the Chinese state. Are we saying we just don't believe that?
Well, they said that, and they said that in 2020. But in December 2020, ByteDance then admitted that several of its Beijing-based employees did access the data of 2 US journalists that were going to TikTok, and a small number of other users. They never defined who they were. So, they're saying they don't access it, and then they admitted that they do access it. So, that means that they've got access to that data. The Chinese law requires them to give it to the Chinese intelligence services should Chinese intelligence services ask for it, and they've admitted already doing that. So we shouldn't have it in any of our devices.
All right. Well, I mean, government, you said any of our devices. This applies to government devices, not even the private devices of government ministers or senior civil servants. So what should we do as punters? What should we do?
Well, I think people need to realise the level of digital exposure that they've got. And, the average individual is going to be of no interest to Chinese intelligence. However, their contacts may be, their data may be being stored for something else. So if you get a young student who's playing on TikTok at the moment, but, in 10 years' time, they've got a job in a government agency or a company that's working into government, a lot of that data could be potentially used to go back and blackmail people into working a little bit closer to the Chinese government, or used as a bridge of getting other bits of software into other devices that are being used. It's very dangerous indeed, and people really need to understand their digital exposure, and most people don't.
Really good to talk to you, as always. Thanks very much indeed. It makes me glad I don't have TikTok. Actually, thank you very much for that. Look, the breaking news this afternoon is, of course, that a deal has been reached between the government and NHS staff working in England. We'll hopefully get a few more details now. We've just heard from the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay.
The government's made a formal offer to the NHS Staff Council that I've just come out of a meeting with them. I'm very pleased that they've agreed to recommend to their members. It will be for a 5% pay rise next year, 2023-24, but also an additional lump sum in terms of this year, which is additional to the award through the pay review body, which was on average 4.75%. And then what that will mean, for example, for a newly qualified nurse is over 1,800 this year, on top of that PRB award, and a pay rise of over £1,300 next year. And obviously that increases for more senior nurses in higher grade.
Now, of course, some of that money for this year is a one-off payment, which means it doesn't go long-term into the salaries of those people. You've said frequently that you wouldn't look at this year's pay. Why didn't you do this earlier?
Well, we have listened to the concerns of the trade unions. We've had meaningful discussions with them. Both sides have engaged constructively. Obviously, the starting position from the number of the unions was much higher. And so both sides have worked together to reach a settlement which is both affordable to the wider taxpayer and balances the very real pressures we recognise that NHS workers have been on. So this balance was required on both sides. That is what the talks explored. And that's why I very much welcome that we've reached a settlement with the NHS Staff Council that balances our commitment in government to get inflation down, to look at the cost and what was affordable to the wider economy, to taxpayers, that also recognise the very real pressures that NHS staff had faced through the pandemic and particularly through the recent winter.
So an important question, how much is it going to cost and how will it be funded?
Well, we've been clear that it will not come at the expense of impact on patients. Obviously, how these things are funded are a matter for the Chancellor, and we discussed that within government. But we've been
he hasn't offered any new money. He didn't in the budget.
We've been very clear in terms of the conditions of the discussions we had with the trade unions that this will not come from patient-facing aspects. Of course, we will look at areas of underspend, areas of administrative saving, and discuss these things with the Treasury in the usual way. But the commitment is one that the trade unions have recognised is meaningful. It reflects very constructive engagement with them. It means there will be a lump sum additional for NHS staff this year, recognising the pressures, and a 5% settlement for next year.
The funding thing isn't important, though. There are hospital trusts who are very concerned that even if some of this has to come out of existing budgets, it's going to mean more pain for patients.
Well, we're being clear that as part of the discussions we had, this would not come from areas of the budget that impact on patients. So those was part of the terms of the discussions that we had. That was the nature of the negotiation, and that was part of the mandate I received from the Prime Minister and from the Chancellor.
There are many people, though, who will look at this and say this dispute has been going on for months. There was talk of a one-off payment several weeks ago, months ago, in fact. Were you blocked from doing that and pursuing that by the Treasury?
Well, we take decisions across government. These things are entered into collectively. Of course, part of my job as the Health and Social Care Secretary is to advocate for the NHS within government in exactly the same way that the Education Secretary will do so for teachers or the Transport Secretary for train drivers. My job is to make the case for the NHS within government. Of course, that is something that I have been doing over recent months, but we make these decisions collectively. I'm very pleased we've reached a settlement which the NHS Staff Council feel able to recommend to their members. It balances our commitment to get inflation down, to guard the interests of the taxpayer, but does so in a balanced way that also reflects the very real pressures that the NHS has been under over recent years.
Been forced to the negotiating table, haven't you, by the strike action? And for those people who've had operations and treatment cancelled, postponed potentially for months or years, they're going to say you should have done something sooner.
Well, there's been significant movement in terms of what the trade unions were originally asking for. For example, one of the trade unions originally was suggesting a 19% settlement. So there's been movement on all sides.
They moved some time ago, though, didn't they?
Well, not to the position that we are on today. So there's been further constructive engagement. We've had intensive talks over many days. There's been movement on both sides, and that reflects the balanced nature of the settlement we've reached, looking after the interests of taxpayers, getting inflation down, but recognising the real pressures that the NHS has faced.
Finally, I know you'll be pleased, of course, that you seem to have reached an agreement here, but junior doctors, this doesn't include junior doctors, does it?
No, and my door is open. I look forward to having discussions with them. Clearly, we entered the talks with the Agenda for Change trade unions on the basis of them suspending their strikes, respecting the engagement principles. I welcome the leadership that the trade unions have shown in those discussions. We've both discussions that have respected the confidentiality throughout. Both sides have been willing to work in a very constructive way, and I hope the junior doctors will take note of that and reflect that in their approach over the coming weeks.
The message to them is they need to suspend strike action, is that right?
Yes, that's the principles which the other trade unions accepted, the RCN, Unite, Unison, the GMB, all respected that. We've offered the same terms to the junior doctors that were accepted by those other trade unions, and that's what I hope the junior doctors will respond to. But a request from them for a pay rise of 35% is not affordable. That's why we need to see from them the same sort of leadership that we've seen from the trade unions in the Agenda for Change contract.
Thank you very much.
Well, there you go. It is 3 minutes past 4 this afternoon. This is GB News, whether you're watching us on TV, listening to us on the radio, or you've got us on the app. This is the breaking news this afternoon, that a deal has been reached between those representing... Excuse me, will we just lose that tone? A deal has been reached between those representing key NHS workers in England and the government. So the strikes are, for now, over. They're not over permanently because this has to be now put to the members, but with a recommendation, as we understand it from the unions, that this should be accepted. So it's an important development, isn't it? It looks like 6% or thereabouts, but in a lump sum payment being made for the last 12 months, 5% moving forward. And that includes, of course, nurses, ambulance workers and other NHS staff, but not doctors. It's a significant development. We've got full reaction and analysis coming up for you throughout the course of the afternoon. But let's get a full roundup of all the headlines for you right now with Polly.
Stephen, thank you, and good afternoon. Well, as you've been hearing in that breaking news, the government has now agreed a pay offer with health unions representing nurses, ambulance staff and other NHS workers in England. They're going to receive a consolidated pay increase now of 5%, and there's an additional lump sum worth at least £1,655. Health unions have now suspended all planned strikes and are recommending their members accept the deal in an upcoming ballot. As Steve was explaining, it is now going to the members to vote upon. And all this comes after health workers in Scotland, represented by the GMB union, accepted a 6.5 pay offer from the Scottish Government. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the country can finally move forward. Well, in other news today, the Institute for Fiscal Studies says the impact of the government's new childcare subsidy on the labour market is highly uncertain. That's after the Chancellor announced children over the age of 9 months in eligible households could be entitled to 30 hours of free childcare a week. The independent group also said scrapping the pension's lifetime allowance was unlikely to play a big part in increasing the workforce, but warned it would be expensive. Well, in response, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has pledged to reverse the pension plan, saying it'll only help the richest 1%.
The idea that a £1 billion giveaway to the richest 1% was necessary just falls apart the moment it's examined. But it is about priorities. You know, the government has chosen not to prioritise those families that are really struggling. Energy bills, yes, of course, there's some cap on it, but they're still double what they were just a few months ago. And, you know, a lot of people are paying £2,000 more on their mortgage because of the mess that the government have made.
Well, as it looks like one set of strikes may be called off, today commuters are facing major disruption on the rail network as members of the RMT union walk out again in their long-running dispute over pay. 3 and 5 services across the UK have been cancelled today. Further strike action planned for the end of March, on the 30th and on the 1st of April. RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch says the pay offer of a 5% rise for last year and a further 4% this year equates to a real terms pay cut.
All of those pay increases, such as they are, which are amount to pay cuts, have got to be funded by changes to our members' working conditions. So it's a self-funded pay rise, really, and that's very difficult for us because the conditions they're putting on that deal are just not acceptable to our people. So we're stuck in a deadlock, really, where the offer is underfunded, the conditions are not acceptable, and we haven't got a way forward.
Well, let's take you straight now live to the headquarters of Unison, where our political reporter Olivia Utley has an update. Olivia?
Hello, yes, I'm here at the headquarters of Unison. A deal has been agreed and it's a big shift from where the government was just a couple of months ago. The government was offering a 3.5% pay rise with no backdated payment for 2022-23. It's now offering a 5% pay rise with a 6% one-off payment for this year. Now, I'm here with the head of health at Unison, Sarah Gorton. Sarah, are you happy with the deal that's been agreed today?
Well, what I'm very pleased about is that an offer has finally been made. This was hard won by health workers who, as you know, have been on strike several times over the course of a really, really difficult winter. So it's taken several months to get to the point where we are able to take an offer back to members. And as you say, it's a combination of a consolidated one-off lump sum for 22-23, and that lump sum ranges in value from $1,600 at the bottom of the pay scales right up to $4,000, with most people who are in registered occupations getting over £2,000. So it is a credible offer. Elected health workers in the unions that are in dispute have agreed today to put it to members and will be recommending to accept. So it's over to the health workers themselves to see whether they want to pick this offer up or they want to continue the dispute and wait for the pay review body to settle the element of the package that is for the 2023-24 pay year.
Great, thank you. And just to clarify, so you will be fully endorsing this deal to your members, and are the other unions who are involved in this dispute doing the same?
So there are 6 unions who are currently have mandates for strike action and have been in dispute. So Unison, the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy, GMB, the British Dietetic Association, the Royal College of Nursing will all be putting the offer with a recommendation to accept. Unite will be putting it to their members on a neutral basis. But this is, the negotiators from the union side, we have been locked in very robust negotiations. We have done our utmost to make sure that this is a significant investment that is available for pay. We would have liked to have seen this in pay packets this time last year, because that might have stopped the exodus of people that we've seen from the health service, leaving to go to better paid and less stressful jobs elsewhere. But we are at a point now where members have, all of the people I've spoken to who've been on strike want an offer to come forward. So this is, this day has come too late, but we are pleased that we've finally got an offer to give to members.
Do you feel like the moral of the story is essentially that striking works?
Well, I think the moral of the story is that when government works with trade unions, we can actually deliver something that might make a difference to the health service. So, we want to see this as the start of a process where government actually listens to trade unions and accepts that we're the voice of health workers and wants to work with us constructively.
And just finally, how do you feel about all of the operations that have been delayed, the care that's been cancelled, the people whose health has been affected by these strikes?
So as we've said during the course of the dispute, at every single strike day, we have been straining every sinew to ask the government to negotiate with us and bring forward another offer. Because what everybody wants, everybody in the health service wants a service that works more efficiently, and that means investing in staff. Whether the investment that's been put on the table today will be enough, the health workers themselves will have that say. But we've been waiting a long time for something to consult members over, and at least we can go back to them and talk to them about this offer.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Very good to speak to you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Olivia Utley outside the Unison
Sarah
headquarters in London. Thanks very much indeed. Well, there you have it, a significant breakthrough for health workers and their negotiations with the government. A 5% pay rise from April offered to NHS staff in England. That includes nurses and ambulance workers. We'll have more headlines at past.
Polly, thank you. It was interesting, wasn't it, that interview that Olivia just did, saying, well, perhaps this is going to open the door for the government to enter, better negotiations with all unions when they're fighting, from their perspective at least, for the benefit of their members. So that's worked, so it would seem, with NHS staff in England. Also NHS staff in Scotland, who've their members have agreed a deal with the Scottish government. It's a different story, isn't it, on the railways and in schools. Train services across the country have been badly hit today. RMTs on strike. Schools and universities are also affected today, with teachers and lecturers taking industrial action. Let's head to our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, who's at Birmingham New Street Station for us this afternoon. Jack, I guess commuters are just actually getting used to this now and having Plan B ready to roll.
Well, that's right. These strikes have been going on for so long that many people know that when it's a strike day, they'll either swap the train for a bus or a tram, as it is the case here in Birmingham city centre. And so disruption doesn't seem to have had the impact, certainly today, as much as it has had in the past few months. Of course, in comparison to other days of industrial action, there's still quite a few services that are running from the stations across the country today. A lot of the local lines here are running just about one train an hour. On some routes it's two. As well for the West Coast main line, certainly there's a lot more trains than there usually are on days of industrial action. So commuters have still been able to use the railways and get around. And of course, those deals we're hearing there with the deal struck with the nurses, there are still deals to be struck with the RMT and the rail operating companies. There's 14 of them still in dispute today. They've been offered a 9% pay rise, which of course backdated 5% for 2022, 4% for this year, and for the lowest paid people within those companies has been offered a 13% pay rise. When it comes to Network Rail, their industrial action today was suspended after the RMT decided to put that 9% pay offer to their members. That ballot closes on Monday, and it's meant that the Rail Delivery Group and their chair, Steve Montgomery, is questioning why the RMT has not put their offer from the train companies to their members to vote on as well. The Department for Transport as well saying that it's only right that the members get a democratic vote on this offer, but Mick Lynch saying that realistically this offer is rubbish and that's why they've rejected it. He says that over the 3 years that they've not had a pay rise, that's led to a retail price index inflation of 22% and actually a real term pay cut. So even with this 9% or even 13% offer for some people, it means they're not getting a pay increase in line with inflation. But what does this mean for commuters? How are they feeling after, of course, these months of strike action? I've been catching up with some people on the streets of Birmingham today.
It's affecting hard-working people. People want money. People want money to live in times that are hard. Cost of living, petrol, food, energy. They deserve money like everybody else wants a decent wage to survive.
They're very inconvenient for me who's got the train today, but I absolutely understand why people are fighting for what they believe in.
It's just an inconvenience to the whole public, isn't it? But I don't think the trains have been any good ever since they were privatised, so I don't think I've seen anything improved by privatising it whatsoever. We're paying through the nose for that service, and it's next to useless.
So interesting there to hear around the lack of trust maybe coming from a lot of the public within the rail network. But for those people wanting to use trains today, a lot of services only running up until around 7 p.m.
Jack, for now, thanks very much indeed. Let's rattle on, should we, because there's loads to get through this afternoon. The Shadow Chancellor has been unpicking Jeremy Hunt's budget in the House of Commons this afternoon. Now, the Chancellor has defended his pensions giveaway, batting off criticism from Rachel Reeves that the government's delivering for the wrong people. Labour say that pension tax breaks aimed at effectively keeping doctors in work shouldn't be given to everybody. We're joined by the Conservative MP for Blackpool South, Scott Benton. Scott, before we ask you about all this budget debacle and what the Labour Party is making of it all, can I just ask you about this NHS deal for England? Is there a sense of relief, do you think?
I think there will be a sense of relief, not just among our brilliant, hard-working NHS staff, but among patients and indeed everybody in Westminster as well. Clearly, strikes are in nobody's best interests. Patients across the country have lost out to some degree, had appointments cancelled, operations cancelled, etc., whilst these strikes have taken place. So it will be met with a huge sigh of relief. I'm pleased the government's talks have come to fruition. Clearly, we have to wait for us trade unions to make a final decision, but at this point, it looks very promising, and I think it will be welcomed by people across the nation.
It is promising, and yet the one union representative we were talking to was saying, well, perhaps this is a sign that the government is going to be prepared to listen to union demands a little bit more, because, of course, there's still plenty of strike action ongoing, including for doctors within the NHS and junior doctors as well. I mean, do you think this is an indication that the government is going to have to bend and at least provide them with something equivalent to what they're providing nurses and ambulance staff?
Well, I think, to be fair to the government, we have been engaged in negotiations, not just with NHS workers, but also those working in other areas, including on the railways as well, for a number of months now. Unfortunately, deals have been difficult to be finalised. I'm so pleased this deal, which affects nurses and ambulance workers, looks like it has now been completed, and we've got that one over the line. I'm sure those talks will also intensify with those working on the trains and in other sectors as well. But from a Conservative politician's point of view, these strikes have affected the economy, they've affected everyday people's lives. So I'm pleased that we're now getting to a point where some of them may have been brought to an end. But also the unions have to be realistic, frankly, in terms of what they have been looking for. And at various points throughout the strike action, some of the demands from trade unions, I'm afraid, haven't simply been realistic in terms of the pressures on the exchequer, the pressures on public finances. But it looks like we're getting beyond some of those issues, and hopefully the next few weeks will be fruitful in terms of ending further industrial action.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because looking at the budget debate this afternoon, I mean, a lot of that actually focuses on the NHS as well, doesn't it? Because the argument is being made that the pensions deal, you know, an unlimited amount that you can put into your pension, but on a yearly basis, rising from 40 to 60,000 that you can put in. Now, the Chancellor's saying, well, you know, that will help consultants, senior NHS doctors, stay in the profession. They're going to be able to save more tax-free. And you can see the argument for that. The Labour Party is saying, well, actually, come on, you know, that could have been targeted rather than just benefiting those who've got that sort of money to put away.
I think the arguments from Labour are pretty transparent and somewhat churlish. So it's only a few months ago Labour politicians were arguing for the government to take this step to make sure that our hardworking doctors can stay in the profession longer, treating patients, and don't get penalised when they reach their 50s in terms of losing money put away in a pension pot. So these changes are overdue. Labour have called for them, as well as Conservative MPs such as myself. So to then turn around a day after the budget to complain and infer that this is the wrong priority the government have taken, I think is somewhat ridiculous. At the end of the day, it's private people's money, whether it be GPs or indeed high earners. They've worked all their lives, done exactly the correct thing in putting money away for a pension pot. And whether it be GPs or indeed people who earn money in other parts of industry, I personally don't have any problem with them keeping more of their money within that pension pot. That's what the Chancellor has now guaranteed following the budget yesterday, and I think it's a positive step forward.
And whilst on the surface, a lot of people would applaud that. I mean, it sort of makes common sense, doesn't it? You work hard, you keep more of your money. Fair enough. The argument is, of course, that it applies to a very small proportion of the population that can even put £40,000 a year in a pension, never mind upping that to £60,000. And it's going to cost the Exchequer something like £1.1 billion in lost revenue. So the argument being made is, well, if you're going to spend £1.1 billion, why don't you spend it on those people who haven't got any money rather than those who are already doing pretty well?
I appreciate that argument. Clearly, from the NHS and a workforce perspective, the imperative was making sure that those hardworking GPs can stay in their profession longer, treating patients, helping to get those backlogs down. So that's why I think this was a positive step forward. What I would say is there are moralistic arguments about potentially doing it just for GPs and not for people who work in other parts of the economy earning a similar amount of money. So I'm not sure you could have necessarily carved out an exception just for those staff. So I do support this as a step forward. What I would say is that we have to look on the tax bands further down, not just in terms of the pension allowance, but also in terms of seeing hardworking public servants such as nurses, police officers, firefighters, etc., being dragged in to those higher tax bands. That's a bit of a concern from my point of view. I regularly speak to people who have, unfortunately, as they've earned more and more money, been trapped by those higher tax bands. If we want to offer a clear dividing line between ourselves as a tax-cutting party and the Labour Party at the next general election, I think it's inevitable we're going to have to look at some of those issues around people earning £30,000, £40,000 being dragged into higher tax bands. The only thing I would say at present is clearly the government has very tight fiscal constraints. You can't spend £400 billion on schemes such as furlough during the pandemic, or indeed the huge amount of money we're spending at the moment to support families with the cost of living without then having difficult decisions about paying that back at a later stage. So Jeremy Hunt has fairly tight room for manoeuvre, but I think this priority in terms of GPs and the high pension allowance was a good step forward.
Well, I'm sure our viewers and listeners have got a view on that, Scott Benton. Can I just ask you, because I can just see out your window slightly, you're in my neck of the woods. What's the weather doing up there at the minute? Because it's been pretty dreadful down here.
Well, funnily enough, I've just been out knocking on doors in Blackpool, actually, over the last few hours, so the weather's not perfect, but there's Blackpool Airport behind me, so flights are still taking off as we speak, so not too bad at this stage, but I dare say it's drier where you are in London than it usually is in Blackpool.
Oh, well, yes, I know that feeling. Scott Benton, really good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, Jay, are you convinced by those arguments that Scott Benter made? I mean, on a personal front, yes, you can see where it'd be beneficial if you've got that sort of money to put away, but it is costing the Treasury. Therefore, if they're going to spend money, should they spend it somewhere else? Let's talk to former advisor to the Bank of England and to the Treasury, Dr. Roger Gewolb. Roger, really good to see you this afternoon. I mean, this has been widely criticised, this move, as not the areas where we need to spend money at the moment. What's your take on it all?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Stephen. That £1 billion, that £1.5 billion should definitely go somewhere else where it's more needed. It would not be hard to make it targeted. It benefits something like 4% of the population at most, and it's just all the same thing. This whole budget has Rishi Rich's stingy fingerprints all over it. He's given us 5p again for petrol. Last time he did that, it didn't even touch the sides. It was of no benefit whatsoever. The 160 quid on energy bills is a joke. All they need to do, as I've been saying for a long time, is to uncouple electricity pricing from gas. Yesterday, the National Grid reported that 57% of our electricity had nothing to do with gas. It came from renewables, solar, nuclear, etc. Far, far cheaper. They could save, the experts say, every home £1,500 in an afternoon. So that's not much of a giveaway either. But I do think, I think the whole budget, frankly, should, as they say, be sent to the second furthest planet. It's just ridiculous. People will have to look that up because I'm not going to say it here, but it's the one next to Neptune. But the point being that the corporation tax, Stephen, just kills everything. That is so ridiculous. These people, I think the chances, after that corporation tax, I think the chances of the Tories being re-elected are about as good as mine as being made principal dancer of the Royal Ballet. They haven't even looked so far to see that we are the ones who are going to pay that corporation tax, not corporations. In the middle of the worst cost of living crisis ever, they are going to raise prices on us some more and crush us further. So I just write the whole budget off as a nonsense.
But you see, what I find fascinating, Roger, and I know you're an expert, and I'm really not in all this sort of thing, but I imagine most of our viewers and listeners aren't experts when it comes to these sort of things either. What I can't understand is why would a government put together a budget that you say, in effect, makes no sense, spending money in the wrong places, benefiting, you know, the top 4%, and putting more pressures on businesses which will, in effect, hit all of us in the pocket. Why would a government at this stage in an economic crisis and saying that they're desperate to go for growth, why would they then come up with this?
It's a really good question because individually, I'm sure all of these are very smart people, very well-intentioned. But when they get together in a group, we have a problem. I mean, I'm continually talking about the lack of good leadership in almost every country in the world at the moment, except perhaps Zelensky. It's very, very disappointing. They want to do the right sort of thing, but they're overly timid about it. They get the wrong idea. I don't know why they don't understand that corporation tax is going to add to our burden as consumers. I just think it's compromise. It's like the committee that wrote Shakespeare, as they say.
Dr. Gewolb, we've got to leave it there, but as always, it's fascinating to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Your thoughts on that, please, if you would, this afternoon. GBViews at gbnews.uk. I mean, it's so complex, isn't it? But should we just apply a bit of common sense to all of this, which is, in effect, what Roger advocates in all of this? Is an interesting fella to listen to. Whether he's right or wrong, I don't know, because I'm not an expert, but I bet you've got a view on it, so do get in touch. Meanwhile, are we on the verge of another global banking crisis? We'll find out. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
It's 4:33. Very good afternoon to you. Here's a question. Are we on the verge of another global banking crisis? Well, let's hope not. Anyway, we're going to be looking at that between now and 5 o'clock. First, though, let's get your latest news headlines with Polly.
Stephen, thank you. The headlines this hour from the GB newsroom, and in breaking news, within the last half hour, the government has now agreed a pay offer with health unions representing nurses, ambulance staff and other NHS workers in England. They're going to receive a consolidated pay increase of 5% and an additional lump sum worth at least £1,655. Health unions have now suspended all planned strikes and are recommending their members accept the deal in an upcoming ballot. And all that coming after health workers in Scotland, represented by the GMB union, accepted a 6.5% pay offer from the Scottish Government. Well, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the country can finally move forward.
There's been significant movement in terms of what the trade unions were originally asking for. For example, one of the trade unions originally was suggesting a 19% settlement. So there's been further constructive engagement. We've had intensive talks over many days. There's been movement on both sides, and that reflects the balanced nature of the settlement we've reached, looking after the interests of taxpayers, getting inflation down, but recognising the real pressures that the NHS has faced.
Well, speaking to GB News a short time ago, Head of Health at Unison in London, Sarah Gordon, said they want this to be the start of the government and unions working together to make a difference.
Well, I think the moral of the story is that when government works with trade unions, we can actually deliver something that might make a difference to the health service. So, we want to see this as the start of a process where government actually listens to trade unions and accepts that we're the voice of health workers and wants to work with us constructively.
Now, in news away from strikes, the Institute for Fiscal Studies says the impact of the government's new childcare subsidy on the labour market, announced in yesterday's spring budget, is highly uncertain. That's after the Chancellor announced children over 9 months would be entitled to 30 hours of free care a week. The independent group also said scrapping the pension's lifetime allowance is unlikely to play a big part in increasing the workforce, but warned it would be expensive. Those are your latest news headlines. We are back at 5. See you then.
Polly, thank you. Well, let's get more then on that NHS pay deal, the breaking news this afternoon. Let's head straight down to our political reporter, Olivia Utley, who's been hanging outside of Unison all afternoon, haven't you, Olivia? This is significant, isn't it? Not just that a deal has been reached, but that the deal itself involves, in effect, a significant pay rise for the financial year that's just coming to an end.
Absolutely. It's a very big shift, really, that we've seen from the government over recent weeks. Previously, the government was saying that it couldn't afford more than a 3.5% pay increase for years 2023 onwards, and that it couldn't even reopen negotiations for the 2022-23 year, the year that's just gone. Now, the government has offered these unions a 5% increase for 2023 and subsequent years, and it's offered a one-off payment, a backdated payment of 6%, about £1,400 more for lower paid workers for the year that we've just had. So it's a big shift there from the government. Now, I've spoken to union representatives. Some union representatives, most union representatives, are going to recommend this deal to their members. Their members still have to vote on it, and if they vote not to push ahead with it, then we could see more strikes. One union, Unite, has held out and is actually not going to recommend the deal to its workers, but it's one of the smaller unions. Sarah Gorton, who I spoke to earlier, the head of Unison, where I'm here today, is going to accept it, and this is what she had to say. No clip yet. So we've also got Sarah Gorton was very positive about the deal. She said that it was a good deal that had been reached, but she pointed out that she felt that it could have been made a couple of over a year ago. So essentially, yes, this is a really big breakthrough as long as the voters agree to it, as is expected. But there is a feeling that it could have been done a little earlier and avoided some of the chaos that we've seen in the last couple of months.
It's interesting because, you want to stay on the positive because it's positive for an awful lot of people, us, as much as anything else, if we need that treatment, Olivia. But on the other side of this, what it doesn't do is tackle the issue with doctors, with junior doctors. All that just falls under a totally different remit, doesn't it? But could this be a sort of stepping stone, if you like, to resolving the issue right across the NHS?
Well, yes, you make a very important point there. The unions which were involved in this particular set of negotiations, they're under the all change, they call it, contracts, and they're involved in these. There are 16 different unions, but it does not include the doctors. So there's junior doctors' strikes that have been crippling hospitals in the past few days. We can expect to see more of those. This is just covering ambulance workers, nurses and other hospital staff. But yes, it is a big breakthrough. It is the beginning of a conversation. And of course we know that previously the relationship between Steve Barclay, the health secretary, and the union leaders, including and especially Pat Cullen, the chief of the RCN, were pretty much at breaking point. They were hardly on speaking terms. So the fact that this deal has been agreed is very positive indeed, and we hope will be the beginning of a more conciliatory relationship between the pair. That said, of course, there will be Conservative backbenchers who will argue that, well, this seems to show that striking works. The government has given in, if you like, to these union demands, and that behaviour perhaps has been rewarded, you could argue. So there's two ways of looking at it. But for patients in England today, it's very good news.
Yeah, certainly is. Olivia, thanks very much indeed. Well, we did hear just a short time ago from the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay.
Well, the government's made a formal offer to the NHS Staff Council that I've just come out of a meeting with them. I'm very pleased that they've agreed to recommend to their members. It will be for a 5% pay rise next year, 2023-24, but also an additional lump sum in terms of this year, which is additional to the award through the pay review body, which was on average 4.75%. And then what that will mean, for example, for a newly qualified nurse is over 1,800 this year on top of that PRB award, and a pay rise of over £1,300 next year. And obviously that increases for more senior nurses in higher grades.
Now, of course, some of that money for this year is a one-off payment, which means it doesn't go long-term into the salaries of those people. You've said frequently that you wouldn't look at this year's pay. Why didn't you do this earlier?
Well, we have listened to the concerns of the trade unions. We've had meaningful discussions with them. Both sides have engaged constructively. Obviously, the starting position from the number of the unions was much higher, and so both sides have worked together to reach a settlement which is both affordable to the wider taxpayer and balances the very real pressures we recognise that NHS workers have been on.
The Health Secretary there. So it recognises the pressures that we have economically at the moment, but is enough to reward those people working in the NHS. Do you agree? If you work within the NHS, if you're an ambulance worker, if you're a nurse or a physiotherapist or a dietitian, all of your unions have, in effect, accepted this offer, but it's down to you to vote now. How would you vote? gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let me know. Now, stock markets have rebounded in banking stocks after Credit Suisse said it's going to borrow about £45 billion from the Swiss Central Bank. Now, it comes following a collapse in its share price, which sent stock markets tumbling yesterday. The real concern here is that's less than a week after the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, prompting fears of another global banking crisis. But since that borrowing of that £45 billion, the FTSE 100 has gained 1.4%. That agreement restoring confidence in the banking sector, so it would seem. Credit Suisse had sought help after revealing it had found material weakness in its financial reporting. Well, let's talk to economist and senior research fellow at Imperial College London, Malcolm Grimston. Malcolm, really good to see you, as always. What are we to make of this? Is this just a bit of a glitch that we've seen over the past week, or is this the start of something more serious?
It's far closer to the former than the latter, I think. Credit Suisse has been in difficulties really for 2 or 3 years now. It's made quite significant losses in both of the last 2 years. And because of where we are with inflation, the normal thing the bank would do if it needed money would be to sell gilts, would be to sell government bonds. But government bonds aren't very good value at the moment because they have a fixed rate of return, a fixed rate of interest. And of course, at the moment, that's quite a long way behind inflation. So they don't look very attractive, and they're not getting a very good price in the marketplace. This is really very different from 2008, though. In 2008, the whole system was making ridiculously risky loans. There was a cancer that really went through pretty much the whole banking system. This is an issue which looks far more like it's specific to Credit Suisse. And indeed, the major governments around the world and the major regulators don't sound desperately worried. This has to be put right, but there's not the suggestion that there's a massive earthquake coming or tsunami coming like we saw in 2008.
Well, do you know what, Malcolm? That's the most cheery news I've heard on the financial sector all afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Being optimistic. Good to talk to you. Thanks very much. Talking of optimism, though, we have got this deal which has been agreed between the government and those NHS workers in England, well, at least the unions representing them, a one-off payment which equates to about 6% for the last financial year, 5% moving forward. It now gets put to the members. Those unions are recommending it to their members, apart from Unite, which is staying neutral on that. Let's talk to NHS GP, Dr Raj Arora, who joins us now. Good to see you, Raj. I mean, I know doctors don't fall within the remit of all of this, but what do you make of this deal and your colleagues within the NHS who are going to be affected by this? Do you think it's a winner?
I think it's really difficult to say, because I think some of the sort of feelings that might be coming out of this are, well, you've kind of given this one-off payment that's going to fall into this sort of year, but it wasn't offered earlier. So I'm a little bit dubious. I kind of feel like maybe the members might feel, well, you could have done this earlier. You could have, prevented some of the striking, and what's come out of it is obviously, cancellation of appointments, etc., and patients obviously being affected. So I think, this is a step in the right direction. The conversation's happened. The strike's been paused. I don't know whether the deal will be voted for by members. I'm not sure if that will be enough.
But it's interesting that, I mean, certainly the Royal College of Nursing, which has played hardball on this and was going in for a very big figure when all this kicked off, I mean, they're backing this now. That's got to have an impact on their members, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. There will be an impact. And I think, the recommendation will be made. I think the reason we have to think about, obviously, what's happening in the economy right now, and how much can we push it when it comes to taxpayer and when it comes to budgeting. So I think there will have to be some sensible thoughts behind that. But I still just wonder if, it's just a little late if it's come, and that might leave a bit of negativity from the members. But again, I'm sure when the recommendations are put to them, there'll be, explanations as to why they feel that they should take those recommendations. And I think that may help to, bring those conversations and negotiations together in a more positive light. I do think it's good that the conversations happen, the strike's been paused. As a NHS doctor and as somebody who has worked in the NHS and trained in the NHS, it's important that patient welfare and staff welfare is put first. And I guess this has shown, a positive move in the right direction from that perspective.
I know it's a difficult one to answer, but if you're going to strike successfully, it's got to be done essentially with public backing, and NHS workers have had that. That might fade away, mightn't it, if people see there's a good deal on the table, more than the rest of us are getting, if it was then rejected? Wouldn't that then cause a bit of a lack of support?
I think you're right. It would cause a lack of support, but I think we have to understand that there has been a lack of support, along the way from the government, and the narrative has been pushed out that actually doctors are greedy, NHS staff have it, and I think easy. And I think actually it took something like COVID for the public to recognise how difficult a time it actually was for staff. So I don't think it's a case of the backing not being there anymore. I think it's a case of, do we want to fix this slightly, for the longer term? Because if they're going to accept the offer and there's going to be more backlash later, more strikes and more disruption, I think it's a case of members and unions having that chat for longevity, because nobody wants this to happen again and again and again,
No, absolutely. Raj Arora, as always, it's good to see you. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
And I'm sure you've got a view on that. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Still to come, we've got a very big question to answer. Why is life expectancy in decline in the UK? We'll try to find out. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio,
with the GB News app, and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 4:51 now. Oxfam has been criticised for cancelling the words mother and father. Its inclusive language guide says staff should avoid using the words and say parent is more inclusive. The campaign group Sex Matters says that's ridiculous. Let's talk to their Director of Advocacy, Helen Joyce. Good afternoon to you, Helen. What's wrong with calling people parents?
Hi. There's nothing wrong with calling people parents, but men and women have different biological roles in becoming parents, and sometimes you're talking about mothers and sometimes you're talking about fathers. And when you're talking about one or the other, you might as well use the right word for it. Words aren't meant to be specifically inclusive. Definitions, by their nature, include the things that are being included in the definition, exclude the things that are being excluded from the definition. So when you're talking about, say, maternal mortality or mothers experiencing domestic violence from fathers, you should use the right words. This is not a concern in the places where Oxfam is doing a lot of its work. This is an incredibly, basically, dare I say it, neo-colonialist measure by an organisation that seems to me to have lost its way.
But isn't there an argument to say, well, actually, parents can be quite useful in some circumstances during discussions which perhaps people, mentally at least, excluding fathers? So there is a role for parent, isn't there, in this?
Yeah, that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is don't use the words women and men. They're saying use words like AFAB, which stands for assigned female at birth. They're saying don't talk about pregnant women. They're talking about pregnant people. Don't talk about breastfeeding women. Talk about breastfeeding people. And the fact is that only women can give birth. Only women can breastfeed. Only women can get pregnant. So when you do this, you actually divert your attention from the people that you're actually talking about, which is women. And you're talking about women who maybe die in childbirth or aren't properly looked after or aren't supported to care for their children, say, by breastfeeding. So actually it's distracting people from what they need to be thinking about when they're trying to help families of all sorts, parents of both sexes, by just using the wrong sort of language.
OK, Helen, I hate to say it, Helen, we've got to leave it there. It's really tight for time, but thank you. You've made your point very succinctly. I'm sure you've got a view on that, gbviews@gbnews.uk. In the meantime, we need to very quickly move on to our longevity. I'm talking quickly because it seems the UK is lagging behind when it comes to life expectancy. I don't know how long I've got left. The UK falls behind every other country in the G7, apart from the United States, when it comes to length of life. Let's talk to Lucy Johnston, Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express. Lucy, we need to talk very quickly. We might all drop dead by the end of the afternoon. What's going on?
Well, in fact, it's not. It's been going on for 70 years or so. In fact, we didn't even notice. I talked earlier on to one of the researchers on that study, and he said, really, we've been seeing this slow decline. We didn't notice over decades. So it's across political parties and across many, many years. And longevity, life expectancy and low life expectancy is associated with very strongly associated with poverty and inequality. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say then, is this about our life expectancy reducing, or is it about it not growing as quickly as it is in other parts of the world?
In fact, it's about not growing as quickly. So in the sort of 70 years ago, we were ranking about 7th amongst all rich countries. And now we're really now nearly near the bottom, alongside or just above the USA. And our life expectancy hasn't grown in line with other countries like Norway, Sweden and Denmark. And in fact, the poorest fifth of people in Britain have less to live on than the poorest fifth people in Eastern Europe. So there is a stark comparison you can make, and looking at, how our real incomes have declined, that the researchers are saying that could be one of the strongest linking factors between that and our life expectancy.
So just very briefly, I mean, this is down to income, is it? Income and poor diet?
Well, it's a complicated mixture. We've had lots of health service reforms which don't help matters. Poor diet, yes, obesity is another thing. We have problems now. We have an acute problem now, don't we, which hasn't been reflected in that study. But it's not looking like we've had excess deaths higher than many other countries, and partly last year higher than some of the pandemic months. So it's a complicated mix. But really the strongest sort of links that we can see is that poverty and mental ill health are strongly correlated with declining or stagnating longevity. And it's a sort of wake-up call. Yeah,
I hate to say it, but our time really is up. It's been really good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. We've got lots more still to come on that NHS deal, which has been agreed, still has got to go to the members. We'll tell you more in just a moment. This is GB.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good afternoon to you. Lots to come in the next hour. We're talking NHS deal. An agreement has been reached with those key workers, ambulance staff, nurses, physiotherapists, the British Dietetic Association, all these key people who've been on strike. A deal has been reached. They've still got to vote for it, but it is now going out to the membership. It's an important step forward. We're going to hear from the unions and from the Health Secretary this hour. Also, we're going to look at the budget. It's been up for debate in the Commons this afternoon. Labour saying, well, it's basically for the rich. It's helping the rich out. Those people who can afford to put more into their pensions will be better off as a result. No help for anybody else. What do you think? GBViews at gbnews.uk. And then there's TikTok. Do you use TikTok? Well, the government has now said on its official mobile devices, you can't have it anymore. There's concern that the Chinese government can get hold of information mined by TikTok, and so it could be, in effect, dangerous, a breach of security. One expert we've talked to this afternoon says we should all get rid of it. Again, what do you think? Let me know on the email, or you can tweet us at GB News. All that to come, but first, here's your news headlines from Polly.
Stephen, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, as Stephen was just highlighting, the government has now agreed on a pay offer with the health unions representing nurses, ambulance staff and other NHS workers in England. They'll receive a consolidated pay increase of 5% and an additional lump sum worth at least £1,655. Health unions have now suspended all planned strikes and are recommending their members accept the deal in an upcoming ballot. And all that coming after health workers in Scotland, represented by the GMB union, have accepted a 6.5% pay offer from the Scottish Government. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the country can finally move forward.
There's been significant movement in terms of what the trade unions were originally asking for. For example, one of the trade unions originally was suggesting a 19% settlement. So there's been further constructive engagement. We've had intensive talks over many days. There's been movement on both sides, and that reflects the balanced nature of the settlement we've reached, looking after the interests of taxpayers, getting inflation down, but recognising the real pressures that the NHS has faced.
Well, speaking to GB News a short time ago from central London, the head of health at Unison, Sarah Gorton, said they want to be sure this is the start of the government and unions working together to make a difference.
Well, I think the moral of the story is that when government works with trade unions, we can actually deliver something that might make a difference to the health service. So, we want to see this as the start of a process where government actually listens to trade unions and accepts that we're the voice of health workers and wants to work with us constructively.
Well, in news away from the NHS pay deal and reacting to yesterday's spring budget, the Institute for Fiscal Studies says the impact of the government's new childcare subsidy on the labour market is highly uncertain. That's after the Chancellor announced children over the age of 9 months in eligible households would be entitled to 30 hours of free care every week. The independent group also said scrapping the pension's lifetime allowance was unlikely to play a big part in increasing the workforce, but warned it would be expensive. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has pledged to reverse the pension plan, saying it'll only help the richest 1%.
The idea that £1 billion giveaway to the richest 1% was necessary just falls apart the moment it's examined. But it is about priorities. You know, the government has chosen not to prioritise those families that are really struggling. Energy bills, yes, of course, there's some cap on it, but they're still double what they were just a few months ago. And, you know, a lot of people are paying £2,000 more on their mortgage because of the mess that the government have made.
Well, as one set of strikes has been called off today, commuters are facing major disruption now on the rail network as members of the RMT union walk out once again in a long-running dispute over pay. 3 in 5 services across the UK are cancelled today, and further strike action is planned for the 30th of March and the 1st of April. The RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch says the pay offer of a 5% rise for last year and a further 4% this year equates to a real terms pay cut.
All of those pay increases, such as they are, which are amount to pay cuts, have got to be funded by changes to our members' working conditions. So it's a self-funded pay rise, really, and that's very difficult for us because the conditions they're putting on that deal are just not acceptable to our people. So we're stuck in a deadlock, really, where the offer is underfunded, the conditions are not acceptable, and we haven't got a way forward.
Mick Lynch. Now, the government's imposed a ban on the TikTok app on all government devices with immediate effect. Cabinet Minister Oliver Dowden told the Commons it's a precautionary measure following the National Cyber Security Centre's review of the Chinese-owned company. The United States, Canada and Belgium have already introduced similar measures. MPs are to vote on Rishi Sunak's post-Brexit trade deal for Northern Ireland next week. They're going to be asked to approve a statutory instrument relating to the Stormont Break section of the Windsor Framework on Wednesday. It's going to be the first time the Commons has been able to vote on the Prime Minister's new deal, which was agreed with the EU last month. Now, take a look at this. The Pentagon has released some video of the moment a Russian fighter jet nearly collided with a US Reaper drone over the Black Sea earlier on this week. It's a declassified video and it shows the Russian plane approaching the unmanned drone and dumping fuel, which damaged a propeller. Russia has denied the accusations that its jets acted recklessly in the incident, which happened on Tuesday. You're with GB News. More news at 5:30. See you then.
Polly, thank you. 7 minutes past 5. So the big news this afternoon is that major breakthrough in the dispute between the government and the NHS in England. It's been announced that further strikes by ambulance staff and other NHS workers have been suspended, and unions will recommend acceptance of a new pay offer to NHS workers. Nurses and ambulance workers in England have staged a number of strikes in recent months. Well, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has now called on junior doctors to follow the example of other health unions who've called off their industrial action and entered into talks on pay with the government. Well, let's talk to Olivia Utley, who's outside Unison headquarters in central London for us. I mean, it's interesting, Olivia, isn't it, when we look at what has been achieved with this agreement and whether that can be carried forward, as the Health Secretary wants, to those people within the NHS who are still striking.
Yes, I mean, there's a question mark over whether this is going to be a beautiful new era of
easy negotiations and easy relationship between the trade unions and the government, but this is certainly a big breakthrough on both sides, really. On the government side, at some point, as Steve Barclay mentioned in an interview, these unions were asking for a 19% pay rise. Well, the pay rise that they've agreed is now 5%, so that is quite a big climb down. On the other hand, the government late last year were offering a 3.5% pay raise and saying that reopening negotiations about pay this year, the 22-23 year, would be impossible. Well, now they've offered that 5% pay rise for next year and subsequent years and agreed to a one-off payment of a 6% pay rise for 22-23. So it looks like we're heading for a breakthrough. Well, I spoke to Sarah Gorton earlier, who's the head of health at Unison. Here's what she had to say.
Well, what I'm very pleased about is that an offer has finally been made. This was hard won by health workers who, as you know, have been on strike several times over the course of a really, really difficult winter. So it's taken several months to get to the point where we are able to take an offer back to members. And as you say, it's a combination of a consolidated one-off a lump sum for 22-23, and that lump sum ranges in value from $1,600 at the bottom of the pay scales right up to $4,000, with most people who are in registered occupations getting over £2,000. So it is a credible offer. Elected health workers in the unions that are in dispute have agreed today to put it to members and will be recommending to accept. So it's over to the health workers themselves to see whether they want to pick this offer up or they want to continue the dispute and wait for the pay review body to settle the element of the package that is for the 2023-24 pay year.
Great, thank you. And just to clarify, so you will be fully endorsing this deal to your members, and are the other unions who are involved in this dispute doing the same?
So there are 6 unions who are currently have mandates for strike action and have been in dispute. So Unison, the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy, GMB, the British Dietetic Association, the Royal College of Nursing will all be putting the offer with a recommendation to accept. Unite will be putting it to their members on a neutral basis. But this is, the negotiators from the union side, we have been locked in very robust negotiations. We have done our utmost to make sure that this is a significant investment that is available for pay. We would have liked to have seen this in pay packets this time last year, because that might have stopped the exodus of people that we've seen from the health service, leaving to go to better paid and less stressful jobs elsewhere. But we are at a point now where members have, all of the people I've spoken to who've been on strike want an offer to come forward. So this is, this day has come too late, but we are pleased that we've finally got an offer to give to members.
Do you feel like the moral of the story is essentially that striking works?
Well, I think the moral of the story is that when government works with trade unions, we can actually deliver something that might make a difference to the health service. So, we want to see this as the start of a process where government actually listens to trade unions and accepts that we're the voice of health workers and wants to work with us constructively.
And just finally, how do you feel about all of the operations that have been delayed, the care that's been cancelled, the people whose health has been affected by these strikes?
So as we've said during the course of the dispute, at every single strike day, we have been straining every sinew to ask the government to negotiate with us and bring forward another offer. Because what everybody wants, everybody in the health service wants a service that works more efficiently, and that means investing in staff. Whether the investment that's been put on the table today will be enough, the health workers themselves will have that say. But we've been waiting a long time for something to consult members over, and at least we can go back to them and talk to them about this offer.
Yes, that was Sarah Gorton of Unison Union there, and as you can see, she's sounding pretty welcoming of that, talking about a new era of negotiations with the government, the start of a new process. Of course, the fly in the ointment for the government is that there were 14 different unions who were involved in this negotiation process. And at least one of them, that's Unite, which represents quite a small group, but a group nonetheless of NHS workers, has said that it won't recommend this deal to its workers. So the government had, you can see the scale of the deal that the government had on its hands, the scale of the difficulty, trying to agree a deal with all of these 14 unions. Well, we expect most of the big ones to recommend that deal, but if a couple of unions hold out recommending that deal, then it is always possible that the members vote against it and it is unable to go ahead. Still, right now, it feels as though we are getting to a breakthrough, and Steve Barclay feels the same.
Well, the government's made a formal offer to the NHS Staff Council that I've just come out of a meeting with them. I'm very pleased that they've agreed to recommend to their members. It will be for a 5% pay rise next year, 2023-24, but also an additional lump sum in terms of this year, which is additional to the award through the pay review body, which was on average 4.75%. And then what that will mean, for example, for a newly qualified nurse is over 1,800 this year on top of that PRB award, and a pay rise of over £1,300 next year. And obviously that increases for more senior nurses in higher grades.
Now, of course, some of that money for this year is a one-off payment, which means it doesn't go long-term into the salaries of those people. You've said frequently that you wouldn't look at this year's pay. Why didn't you do this earlier?
Well, we have listened to the concerns of the trade unions. We've had meaningful discussions with them. Both sides have engaged constructively. Obviously, the starting position from the number of the unions was much higher, and so both sides have worked together to reach a settlement which is both affordable to the wider taxpayer and balances the very real pressures we recognise that NHS workers have been on.
So, a sustainable deal for the economy, something to keep the NHS workers happy. What do you think? I'd love to hear from you this afternoon. If that applies to you, if you're one of those workers who's going to be asked now in the ballot as to whether you support this or not, what are you going to say? Love to have your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, thanks to Olivia as well. We're not going back to her because someone's decided to drill a hole right next to her in the pavement, which is just that's London for you, ladies and gents. If you don't live in the capital, good for you. That's what I say. I don't either, to be fair. I think it's pretty grim, but there you go. I'm a northerner. I'd rather be up in Blackpool. Now, let's keep talking money, should we? Because the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has criticised Jeremy Hunt's budget in the Commons this afternoon. She said the government too late to the party when it comes to childcare. Not a particularly helpful statement in some respects, is it? She's also said the pensions giveaway is just a measure for the top 1%.
Families are facing the biggest hit to living standards since records began. The only surprise in the budget was a huge handout to the richest 1% of pension savers. Yet again, working people and businesses, the key to our economic success, have been put at the bottom of the pile. The question people will be asking themselves after 13 years of Conservative government are these: are me and my family better off? Are our schools, our hospitals, our transport system working better than when the Conservatives came to office 13 years ago? Frankly, is anything in Britain working better today than it did when the Conservatives came to office? And the answer to those questions is a resounding no.
A resounding no. Well, there you go. Let's see what commentator Naomi Kerbel makes of it all. Good to see you this afternoon.
Thank you, Stephen.
I mean, who do we believe on this? Because on some fronts it seems, well, if it encourages people to stay in work, if it allows people to save more for their pensions, takes pressure off the state later on in life, that's got to be a good thing, hasn't it? But it is costing money to support these people who are amongst the better off in society.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, there was a survey today, Stephen, from a UK champion for over 50s called 55 Redefined, and they did just a quick straw poll of their members, which found that 63% of those would return to work if there were tax reform. So that would be a really beneficial thing, clearly. And I think that we were all very excited yesterday when we saw that headline figure, the lifetime allowance, $1 million out the window, save as much as you want to save, and the 40,000 to the 60,000. But now there is that concern, is there going to be a gold rush on pensions? Is everybody going to put a load of money into pensions now, and then in 2024, when Labour changes, when it potentially changes to Labour, are we going to be in a situation where it all reverses? So it's sort of lettuces to turnips.
It is a little bit, but what would be the concern about a gold rush on pensions in that respect? If people shove a load more money in their pension pot, would that have a negative effect on the economy?
I think the problem with that is it's delaying those people getting back into the workforce, and that's the very point of this. We've got this huge amount of inactive workers who could work, and it does come back actually to the childcare issue. Actually, out in the green room, I've got my daughter there today. She's 6. There was a teacher's strike today, and actually her school was in session, so to speak, but there is no wraparound care. So I think we do rely very, very heavily on grandparents in that particular piece, and we can maybe come on to that in a minute. But I think it is just delaying, and actually that might be the issue, that we're not taking advantage, we're not pushing those workers back as quickly as we could.
There is an argument, Labour's saying, and there's also the name of them escapes me just at the moment, but there is also one of these sort of think tanks saying actually they think this policy would actually encourage people to retire early.
Yes, the Resolution Foundation, yes. And that is a slight concern, because, of course, with that raise from 40,000 to 60,000, there could be that impact. What I did think was particularly good, though, and exciting, was this returnership. And the people I've been speaking to have been pushing this for a while now. The apprenticeship programmes are very, very targeted to those in their late teens, 20s. And actually what we need to be doing is upskilling that huge tranche of the population. You know, we have an ageing population and a shrinking workforce, so let's upskill those workers.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Naomi, sadly, we've got to leave it there, but really good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Do you want to be upskilled at a later age? Be interesting to know if that's going to be the right thing for you to do in that point later on in life. Coming up, we're sticking with lots of financial stuff, because are we on the verge of another global banking crisis? It's a big question. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, of course, the breaking news this afternoon is that deal between the NHS in England, or the unions involved with the NHS in England, and the government over those striking workers, your ambulance workers, your nurses, your physiotherapists, dietitians, and a whole host of others. They've reached an agreement. It's now going to be put out to members for them to vote on. Well, we heard from the Health Secretary earlier on. Now we've heard from the Prime Minister.
Government has reached agreement with unions representing over 1 million NHS workers on a fair and reasonable pay settlement. This agreement rightly recognises the fantastic work that our NHS workers like nurses, midwives and paramedics do, whilst also being affordable for the taxpayer and allowing us to deliver on our promises to halve inflation and cut NHS waiting lists. It's a good example of this government getting things done and delivering for the British people.
You say it's affordable for the taxpayers. You won't mind telling us how much it's going to cost and where the money's going to come from?
Well, I think no one can doubt our commitment to the NHS. After I became Prime Minister in the autumn statement, we announced £14 billion of more funding for the NHS and social care. That's because it's the country's #1 priority. It's my #1 priority, and that's why it's well funded. And we will make sure that we continue to deliver on our promise to cut waiting lists. Now that we've got this pay agreement, everyone is united in wanting to deliver the best possible care for patients up and down the country, and that will be our focus.
I've noticed you completely swerved my question. I mean, how much is it going to cost? And you say if it's good for taxpayers, where is the money going to come from? Frontline services?
No, absolutely not. We are going to be making sure that we protect all frontline services with £14 billion of more funding that we announced at the end of last year. No one can doubt our commitment to making sure that the NHS is well funded. That will always remain the case. And we've got a great plan in place to make improvements. And you're already seeing the results of that plan. In fact, if you look at ambulance waiting times or waiting times in A&E, they're already improving considerably from a couple of months ago. And we're on track to keep bringing the waiting list down. And with this pay agreement, now everyone is going to be united behind that, and we can deliver really fantastic quality care for patients up and down the country. That's what everyone in the NHS wants to do. They're being backed fully to the hilt to deliver it, and I look forward to doing that for the country.
OK, well, I'll try my best on that. Well, let me try on whether this is essentially a plan, an outline now for future kind of negotiations when it comes to strikes. Junior doctors still going on strike, rail workers too. Is it this idea of a one-off payment for last year and then a pay rise? Is this the kind of playbook, if you like?
Well, I'm really pleased that we've reached agreement today with unions representing over 1 million NHS workers. And we've always been clear. We want to have constructive dialogue with unions. We're serious about finding fair and reasonable agreements on public sector pay. I think today's agreement demonstrates that. And what I'd say to all other unions is, please don't be striking. Please come in and have those talks. We've been wanting to do that. And today's agreement demonstrates we're serious about it. We don't want disruption for patients. We don't want disruption for school children in our classrooms. So, please come and get round the table. I'm confident we can find a way through this. Today's agreement demonstrates we're serious about this, and we can find workable solutions.
Just two final questions. First of all, on strike itself, you talked about negotiations there, but hasn't this proven just the government's caved in? That if you want to get a better pay deal, nothing better to do than simply just go on strike?
Well, today's pay agreement is fair for NHS workers. We want to make sure that we reward them and recognise the hard work they do, whether that's nurses, paramedics, midwives, but it's also fair for taxpayers. And this was important to us as well. It needs to be affordable and it needs to be consistent with our promise to halve inflation and then get on to cutting NHS waiting lists. That's why we've had constructive dialogue. Today's agreement is fair for everybody, and it was right that we got to this type of solution. I'm really pleased that with this behind us now, we are united in wanting to just get on, deliver high quality patient care, bring the waiting list down. That's what the country wants to see. That's what we're going to deliver.
And just very finally, relating this to the budget, one of the reasons that people went on strike is the cost of living crisis. And that's linked to inflation, but it's also going to be next month going to be linked to increased taxes. Lots of millions of workers are going to pay more tax for next month, taking money out of their pocket, including nurses and doctors. Do you accept that those tax rises effectively, because there's a threshold, the fiscal drag it's caused, is going to add to the cost of living crisis? The government is actually making things worse for people.
The number one challenge with the cost of living is inflation, and particularly with energy bills. So if there's one measure from the budget that I'd ask people to kind of take away with them, it's our continued plan to support people with the cost of energy. Now, what we did last year is made a decision to tax the windfall profits of energy companies and to use that money to help cut people's energy bills. And because of the actions we've taken, people are going to receive £1,500 of direct support off their energy bills last year in this. That's the right thing to do. And if there's one thing you take away from the budget, it's that this government is doing everything it can to help you with the cost of your energy bills. And that's what we will continue doing.
But there are also millions of people going to pay a lot more tax. 500 quid for the average taxpayer, £1,000 if you're a top taxpayer. That means less money in their pockets. The government is adding to the cost of living crisis.
No, the government is helping a typical family in our country to the tune of £1,500 off their energy bill, and we've been able to do that because we decided to tax the windfall profits of energy companies, and we're using that money to take people's energy bills down. That's what this government is doing. We want to help people with the cost of living, particularly with energy bills, and because we tax the windfall profits of those energy companies, we're using that money to discount energy bills. It's worth £1,500 for a typical family, and I think that will demonstrate that this government is on people's side. We care about this, and we're going to keep supporting you.
Well, what do you make of it all? I mean, politicians say what they say. It's up to us as to whether we believe them or whether believe that they're doing the right thing for us. Your thoughts, please. gbviews@gbnews.uk. There is lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock. You can find out why TikTok has been banned from government phones. And is the British government gormless? That's what a former Australian Prime Minister thinks. We'll find out why. First, let's get the latest headlines with Polly.
Stephen, thanks very much indeed. The top stories this hour. The government has now agreed a pay offer with health unions representing nurses, ambulance staff and other NHS workers in England. They're going to receive a consolidated pay increase of 5% and an additional lump sum worth at least £1,655 if they agree to it. Health unions have now suspended all planned strikes and are recommending their members do accept the deal in an upcoming ballot. It comes after health workers in Scotland, represented by the GMB union, accepted 6.5% from the Scottish Government. The Prime Minister says today's agreement is a message to other unions to stop the strikes and start talks.
We want to have constructive dialogue with unions. We're serious about finding fair and reasonable agreements on public sector pay. I think today's agreement demonstrates that. And what I'd say to all other unions is, please don't be striking. Please come in and have those talks. We've been wanting to do that. And today's agreement demonstrates we're serious about it. We don't want disruption.
Well, a short time ago in central London, the head of health at Unison, speaking to GB News, said she wanted this to be the start of government and unions working together to make a difference. Here's Sarah Gorton.
Well, I think the moral of the story is that when government works with trade unions, we can actually deliver something that might make a difference to the health service. So, we want to see this as the start of a process where government actually listens to trade unions and accepts that we're the voice of health workers and wants to work with us constructively.
Well, in a separate issue, junior doctors belonging to the British Medical Association are yet to resolve their pay dispute. However, they've welcomed an invitation to negotiate again from the government, with talks set to take place tomorrow. We'll keep you fully up to date on that one. Those are the latest news headlines. Back to Stephen.
Now, there's lots of talk about money this afternoon, some of it small change, some of it very big indeed. And Credit Suisse has regained some of its losses today and restored investor confidence because it's borrowed up to $54 billion from Switzerland's central bank. That's about £45 billion. Now, the Swiss firm is the first major global bank to be thrown an emergency lifeline since the 2008 financial crisis. And its troubles have raised doubts about whether central banks can sustain aggressive interest rate hikes. Credit Suisse had sought help after revealing that it had found material weaknesses in its financial reporting. What that means, no idea. I wonder if Jasmine Birtles knows. She's the founder of moneymagpie.com. Jasmine, good to see you. What is a material weakness in financial reporting?
A whole load of dodginess, I suspect. All sorts of numbers that are hidden, I believe. I do think that Credit Suisse is one of the banks, one of the first banks that are going to go in what looks like it's going to be another financial crisis, which, of course, we all need like a hole in the head.
Well, so you think, despite this, and despite the market shoring up now in the banking sector, you think that actually Credit Suisse could go, and that's a domino effect, is it?
Well, it feels like it to me. The thing is that Credit Suisse has been on the rocks for a while. I mean, Mitch Firestein, who's been on GB News a couple of times, has written a whole book on it, and it's been the front runner for a lot of people who've been looking at the banking sector and going, this is built on sand, a lot of this. So that it has been the front runner for a while. And it doesn't help that it's been bailed out by the Swiss National Bank, which itself was bailed out last year. And then you've got the European Central Bank that's saying, oh, don't worry, we'll all shore up any banks, we'll be there, we'll put money in. But again, it itself, the European Central Bank, looks like it will need to be bailed out by the European taxpayer, essentially. So you've got this ridiculous sort of merry-go-round of one bank having to shore up another bank, and then the central government having to shore up the central bank, and then the central bank having to shore up the central government. You know, it cannot go on like that.
All right, so what happens then over here? I mean, obviously, you know, it's the whole thing. If America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold and all that sort of thing when it comes to the banking sector. However, what can banks that are based here in the UK do to make sure that they have some resilience against whatever is coming?
Well, in theory, the banks in this country have been stress tested regularly. They have, in theory, had huge amounts of huge piles of money. In theory, that's the idea, that they've been tested to see that they've got all this money, this extra leeway. And according to the rules, the new rules that came in after the last financial crash, our banks are strong. However, there are quite a few people who question those rules, who question the stability, whether it really is genuinely enough for these banks. Because remember, we operate, as do most banks in the West, on a fractional banking system. So fractional banking, as you know, means that there's very little actual money, very few actual assets that each bank has. They create money so that they're lending out, lending, lots of more money than they actually have. So that means that just the whole banking system, that the idea of fractional banking is a little bit wobbly in and of itself, frankly. Entirely legal, it's how we've operated for years, but it's still pretty wobbly when things look difficult outside.
Jasmine, I'm not filled with confidence. I have to say. But nevertheless, it's good to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Oh, dear. Wibbly wobbly. It's not encouraging, is it? Dear me. If you know more about the economic sector than I do, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Give me some hope, please. Now, to some... devastating news for those people involved. It's a hotel housing Ukrainian refugees, a very old one, about 400 years old, engulfed by a fire in West Sussex in the early hours of this morning. Now, it's thought to have broken out just after 1 o'clock in the morning at the property on North Street in Midhurst and then spread to the Angel Inn next door. Our national reporter Theo Chicomba has the story.
Throughout the day, emergency services, firefighters and more agencies, including gas engineers, have been here in Midhurst following a fire which started around 1 a.m. here at the Angel Inn and the buildings next door to it, 400-year-old building where Ukrainians were staying there. They have now been taken away. They are being looked after. Earlier today, I spoke to a restaurant manager who said he was here at around 1 o'clock in the morning, just after his shift had finished. He'd seen smoke in the air alongside his colleague and he came here to assist. He called 999 and then he took those Ukrainians who are staying at this hotel to their restaurant, offering them blankets, food and more until the early hours of this morning. The local council has been inundated with donations, many people giving food, clothing and more for some of those people who have inevitably lost some of their items because of this fire. Emergency services have been working here throughout the day. Today, this afternoon, around 3 o'clock, this is probably the first time you can see the area clearly because there was a cloud of smoke covering the road for most part of the day, but they are now working towards the back of the buildings. We understand they'll be here for the next few days, as well investigations will be continuing to establish what was the cause of the fire.
Theo Chicomba there. Now, still to come for you, a former Australian Prime Minister has had some very harsh words for the UK government. We'll find out what they were. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Now, the former Australian Prime Minister, Paul Keating, has called us Brits gormless, as he's claimed that his country's decision to join the UK and the US in a defence pact could carry deadly consequences. Earlier this week, of course, the AUKUS deal, the three Western allies announced that Australia would buy up to 5 US submarines and launch a 30-year plan to build its own fleet of British-designed nuclear-powered subs. So, are we gormless when it comes to defence? Let's ask the defence editor at the Evening Standard, Robert Fox. Hi, Robert. You're not gormless.
Hello. No. You wouldn't expect me to say so. Paul Keating's remarks were unfortunate. He was joined by a fellow PM of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, who also said this was a rotten deal, because, of course, they'd been involved in a previous deal that did go very badly wrong with the French. The French were going to build ocean-going submarines. They were conventional submarines. And the previous Australian government, which was a Conservative one, the Liberal Party, pulled the plug. And they pulled the plug, I would estimate, for very good reasons. Now, this is what Paul Keating and Malcolm Turnbull are complaining about, that really this is up the ante, the Brits are no good, and it will provoke the Chinese. Now, does this mean that they want to be pals with the Chinese and that they're going to ignore the very aggressive activities of the Chinese in the South Pacific Oceans, and particularly towards Australia? Question mark. Actually, I think the AUKUS deal has proved remarkably well thought out.
So why is Paul Keating and others getting their knickers in such a twist over this? I mean, we know China's made it very clear they're unhappy with the deal. Would have been nice if the subs were, built in Barrow-in-Furness, these first few, rather than being built by the United States, but that's the way it goes. But you do wonder Australia wants to play with the big boys, doesn't it?
Well, that's the point. What Australia is pointing to is a treaty. You can look it up on Wikipedia, but it's a very important one called the Mutual Defence Treaty of 1958, where Britain and America agreed to share all the secrets and all their science on nuclear propulsion for submarines. And it has really worked. And it hasn't leaked. It doesn't go to third parties. And Australia decided, I think quite rightly, it needed long-legged nuclear submarines. They have much greater range than the conventional equivalent. And the way to do it was to get in with a deal like the Brits and the Americans. No, the Brits are not on the back foot. Quite rightly, they say they've got the design initiative, and the Americans want that. The Americans want the Brits to lead the building of the submarines, which will be the continuing fleet for Australia. But they won't come fully on stream for nearly another 20 years, admittedly, but it is technology, development which actually can go to a peaceful area, as we heard, because they may provide the clue to how we're going to develop these mini nuclear reactors for the domestic energy industry. So, in fact, it's not exactly a win-win. It will be expensive, but it will not be as difficult as the prospect for Britain appeared to be just a year ago. Britain is already developing submarines ahead of the design of the Americans. That's the clue. The dreadnought design of the ballistic sub and this new AUKUS Astute class, which is a leap forward.
Robert, as always, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for making sense of it all. Now let's turn our attention to the world of football, should we? Because Gianni Infantino has been re-elected as the president of FIFA. Nobody stood against him. Infantino's been in charge of the world football's governing body since 2016, but of course FIFA criticised for for staging last year's World Cup in Qatar. Let's talk to our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who, of course, was in Qatar for the World Cup. Good to see you. I mean, he's a controversial character at the best of times.
Yeah, he's always got something to say that kind of catches your ear and makes you frown. Look, he's been re-elected as president, which isn't surprising given there was no one running against him, and almost all of the 211 countries in FIFA voted for him, apart from FAs like Germany that weren't happy with his what they say is a lack of transparency when it comes to communication over human rights. And this is going back to Qatar, which you would have thought that's in the past now.
Yeah.
The World Cup's been and gone, but as part of that, there was criticism over Qatar's human rights record. Gianni Infantino himself said, look, the World Cup's going to be transformative. It's going to change things in the country. Well, now the Norwegian FA, after lots of other human rights organisations have said, well, can you prove it? Let's see it. What happened then to all that action then? The two things that FIFA promised at the time were, this is on migrant workers' rights, we're going to set up a trade union in the country, and we're going to set up a compensation fund for the families of those that have died or been injured. So what happened to that? At the moment, there's no word from FIFA. The Norwegians had that added to the agenda today at the Congress, the 73rd FIFA Congress, which only lasted a day. It was in Kigali in Rwanda. That's finished for the day. There was no talk about it, but there was a video that was played from the chair of FIFA's Human Rights Group, who apparently he's a British guy, he's going to conduct an assessment of what did and didn't change in Qatar. So FIFA conducting its own assessment of whether there had been positive change in Qatar or not, and reportedly the head of the Norwegian FA, Lise Klaveness, is happy with that.
I mean, that's hardly transparent, is it? But I mean, what about Infantino's comments at the start of the day? Because I mean, he said he's often controversial. He was controversial today.
Well, he was. So right, he started the day by saying that, talking about kind of the history of Rwanda, okay, and everyone was saying, "Where's this going?" So he went to a football tournament in just before he was elected in 2016. And when he was there, an unnamed official said, "We really love you, but we're not going to support you in your bid to become FIFA president." He said that he went to the Rwanda Genocide Memorial, and after visiting there, he said he was inspired to then run for the presidency of FIFA because of the way Rwanda as a country had bounced back from 800,000 people murdered during the genocide. In that same kind of way, he's going to run for the presidency of FIFA. And I'll give you his exact words because we're going to hear his response in just a moment. So he said, what this country has suffered and how this country came back up is inspiring for the entire world. So I certainly couldn't give up running for the FIFA presidency because someone was telling me something. And this was his response.
I find it really incredible that you can interpret what I say as making an association with one of the most terrible tragedies that happened in humanity in this country with anything that happened in my life. This country is so inspiring. Sorry, I speak. It is so inspiring for so many people on what has been done that when we come with our little problems, we should just, be a bit more humble about things. That's all that I said.
There you go. So just very quickly, before I let you go, on the Women's World Cup, which is coming up in September, controversially, Saudi Arabia, the tourism board there, linked with sponsoring the Women's World Cup. They've obviously got human rights issues there, allegations of human rights, breaking human rights, etc. He confirmed that they do not have a contract with the World Cup, and that will not be happening.
Right. Paul, it wouldn't be FIFA without controversy, would it? Thank you very much indeed. Now, the government here in the UK is cracking down on one of the most popular social media platforms. TikTok is now banned on all government devices that ministers and civil servants have. Comes after the National Cyber Security Centre published a review alleging the app could be harvesting data for the Chinese Communist Party. So, is it a platform for dance crazes, or is it something more sinister? Let's talk to Charles Parton OBE, who's a former diplomat in China, and Anna McGovern, who's a political commentator. Good to see you both this morning. Anna, can I start with you? Talk us through TikTok, because I'm too old to have it.
Yes, so TikTok is a very popular app, especially for young people, but this has, I think, it's grown in popularity for MPs and staffers to utilise because they see it as a way of engaging the youth. We've seen videos, for example, like Nadine Dorry, she did a rap about the online safety bill, which I thought was a little bit ludicrous, but this was a way to engage young people. But however, with TikTok, there is a concern about national security because it is owned by the Chinese state, you know, ByteDance, the company, and it's been proven that the data that you use on the platform, so anything that you search, your friends, your location, is handed to this company, which is then handed over to the Chinese Communist Party. So I think that there's a lot of concerns about this, and I think that this is a very good step that the government has banned this on work phones because there's a huge concern over national security.
Charles, I mean, look, if all that is right, then it's a statement of the obvious, isn't it, that this needs to be banned, and in fact, perhaps banned from the whole country if it's harvesting this much data that is going to a foreign state.
Well, that's certainly the Indian government's way of approaching it. They've abandoned it in India. But I suspect you wouldn't find a politician who's prepared to stand up and say to the voters who are going to elect them in the next election, we want to stop you looking at your TikTok. So whereas that should perhaps be the case, I don't think it will be. But where I think the government hasn't yet gone far enough is that it's all very well banning it from the official telephones and media that you carry, but civil servants and others, ministers, frequently use their own personal devices for communication. And I think that has got to be tackled as well.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, though, on that front, there is no point, is there, in banning it on official devices if you don't make sure that your officials are not using personal devices for official work.
Well, quite, and I think there's been plenty of evidence, maybe some of it from Mr. Matt Hancock, of personal devices being used to transmit their own information, some of it about government. So I think, you know, humans are human. They will go for the nearest and easiest thing. So it's best, I think, to try and persuade or perhaps even ban officials from using.
I mean, Anna, what's your perspective from... I mean, as Charles said, you know, you can't go about banning it right across the country. There's been an uproar amongst young people. Do you think they would? Do you think people appreciate what is happening to their data?
So before I start that, I just want to say about Alicia Kearns. So she's been doing fantastic work in raising awareness about TikTok and the dangers posed to the site. She's an MP. So there are MPs standing up and speaking up against this. But in terms of TikTok and the platform itself, for young people especially, there is a huge risk. There's studies that's proven, for example, that anything that you search, for example, if a young person has mental health problems, has an eating disorder, if you look up that topic on the TikTok search feed, then within minutes, your For You page, which basically targets what your interests are, will be flooded with these sort of content videos. Yeah. And for young people who are particularly vulnerable, that will pose a huge risk for them. So I think that there is definitely an argument to be said that it should be banned.
It's all about those algorithms, isn't it? Look, we've got to leave it there, but really interesting to talk to both of you. Anna and Charles, thanks very much indeed. Well, coming up at 6 o'clock, it's Dubes & Co, and Michelle is here. Good to see you.
Hello,
It's nice to see you in the flesh.
Yes,
Doesn't
what
happen
a
very
treat.
often.
I have to say, you get up much, much earlier than me. We used to do early mornings together, didn't we?
We did. It's been done.
Many years ago, actually, showing my age now. So it's very nice to be here. We was in Doncaster last night.
Right, yes, indeed.
The good people of Doncaster did not let us down. We had a good time, good back and forth, good levels of engagement, all about the budget, and I'll be picking up that budget fallout again tonight as well. Looking at, do you know, there's millions and millions more people going to be pushed into the 40p tax rate now, and I'm fascinated to see what people think to that.
It's a stealth tax, isn't it, in effect?
Yeah, it's always interesting because people will always say, get the rich to pay more, get the rich to pay more, and then all of a sudden people find it's them that's paying more, and then people kind of turn against the system a little bit. So I'm interested in people's reactions to that. And net migration as well, by the way, 250,000 estimated every year. How do we sustain that?
Yeah, look, some very big questions you're going to tackle. Michelle, thank you very much indeed. Michelle's here at 6. I'm back with you 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thanks for your company today.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is